What's up, everybody? Welcome back to yet another episode of Very Vehicular, and I am your host, Brian Scotto. Today, we are joined by none other than JR Hildebrand. You may know him best from the racing he has done, specifically in Indy. But I like to think of him as potentially one of the smartest race car drivers I've ever met. And today, we focus on how to save motorsports. Both of us have recognized that in the past 2 decades, there has been a major decline in this thing that we love. And the question now is, how do we reverse it? It might be our job. It might be your job. But either way, it's got to happen. Anyway, buckle up. This is a long episode, a contender for one of our longest, and it gets deep. So enjoy it. I certainly did. One of the best conversations I've had yet. Oh, and lastly, this may be one of the episodes I talk the least in. That's how much JR has to say. One thing I love about the team at Vyper is that they're just like us. They can't leave anything stock. Otherwise, they'd only make red and black stools. Instead, they are constantly releasing limited edition colorways. 2 of my favorites they've done, the Ghoul, which is glow in the dark, and the Voodoo, which is this really rad deep purple and black. And if you like camo, you can get a Vyper stool trimmed in official real tray. They've even done really cool collabs with friends of ours like Roadster Shop and the Drift HQ. Maybe one day, they'll do a Scotto edition. Although, they keep telling me no one wants a stool that's missing half of its parts and doesn't ever roll. Anyway, check them out at vyperindustrial.com. That's Vyper with a Y. Of all the sunglass companies out there, you might ask, why Heatwave? Aside from them being friends of mine, they just make great shades. Awesome styles, cool collabs, smart tech. They even have extra large sizes for big heads like me. And for those of you wearing this on the job, they make ANSI Z87 spec safety glasses too. But what really attracts me to Heatwave is that they are physically a part of our culture. You will find them everywhere, from King of the Hammers to Formula Drift. You'll see everyone wearing Heatwaves at your local track day event. Damn, you might even turn laps with the co-founder Justin, because they're one of us. So, one more reason to choose Heatwave Visual to fix your face. Don't lie, be honest, we've all done it. And Wera Tools isn't here to shame us for it. Instead, they made the perfect ratchet hammer. What's that? It's called the Coloss. It's a 1/2-inch drive ratchet nestled inside of a hefty drop forged hammer. And if the utter genius of this is lost on you, maybe we can't be friends. The additional extension is great for breaking free stubborn bolts or breaking anything that requires double-handed persuasion. I love this tool. I keep it in my go bag, whether the job calls for 6 degrees of surgically precise engagement angle or just medieval brutality. The Coloss can't be beat. Find this hilariously useful instrument as well as many others at weratools.com. JR Hildebrand, welcome to the show. I want to start by saying this is a show I am really excited about because you came out here, I don't know, I guess it was for Indy in Long Beach. We caught up for breakfast and we talked for like 2.5 hours. And I ended saying this should have been a podcast because we had this really great convo. So we're basically going to try to repeat that conversation, but here, and I'm sure there'll be new stuff that comes out of it. But as we joked before the show, you're like pre-internet. So you had your big moment.
It makes me feel old. It's just because I started doing what I was doing when I was young.
But like you were like you were at your like peak moment in racing in 2010, 2011, right?
Yeah, but my rookie year in IndyCar, so I got like made it pro in 2011. Yeah. So that was kind of like when things got real.
Yeah, because I was gonna say I feel like we have to do like just a quick little rapid fire questions so that the audience kind of knows a little bit more about you. So you already said you're an IndyCar racer. I don't want to start with this, but what are you most famously known for?
Most famously known for crashing on the final lap of the 2011 Indianapolis 500.
Not just the final lap, but the final
corner. Yeah.
You slid through the finish line went from first place to second place.
Yeah. It was a crazy kind of end of race fuel strategy situation that I came upon. I was saving fuel to try to make it to the end of the race. Yeah. We were running kind of 5th, 6th or something coming into the final stanza of the race. So we were like, if I had just stayed out and we'd stayed on strategy, you're rookie of the year and whatever anyway.
Right.
But we took a gamble to take a pit stop when nobody else was going to. We were going to just stay out and save fuel all the way until the end. Dario Franchitti and I pitted together. He was in the lead. The laps like click down, and then just all of a sudden you're in the lead of the race. Like Dario was my bogey, basically. Like I know I'm racing him because we're on the same strategy. Passed him with a few to go, but because we're both just like looking at the ticker on the steering wheel to figure out, have I saved enough? Right. You're not even really racing. You're just kind of managing this whole thing.
Yeah.
And you don't know what is going on around you at all. Basically, you're like, maybe you glance up at the pylon, but you're still going, you're saving fuel doing 215 or something. Like, so you don't have like a lot of time to think about anything that's happening. And I was a rookie. Like, I don't, you really don't know what's going on at that point. At the end, like, you're coming from racing in championships where you don't even make pit stops,
right?
Up to that point. So yeah, end of the race, get into just assume the lead because cars are peeling off to make their pit stops until the end of the race.
So you were leading at this point for only 5 laps or something,
couple laps, I think. And just, again, like I'm just trying to hit my number to make sure I make it to the end. And final lap, take the white, I obviously know I'm in the lead of the race at that point, but still, I've got guys that have come out of the pits that are 20 car lengths back, but moving like a freight train. You're kind of guys coming in and out of the pits on the back straight, whatever. Ended up basically catching a car that I assumed was coming out of the pits, getting back up to speed, what was in fact running out of fuel coming into turn 4. And by the time I realized what was going on, it was like, well, you got 2 options. One is park it behind this guy going 30, 40 miles an hour slower. Never felt like I was like at risk of crashing into him, but you're going to have to really stop and you're losing a lot of momentum. Or just try to skate around the outside. Like, people ask me this all the time.
Oh, I know. And I'm sorry that we start with this, but it is for the audience that's listening who's not aware. This is unfortunately what you are infamous for.
It's so funny because it's like, it's so not on my mind ever.
Of course.
But I caught up to the 83 and in hindsight, like the thing that I would have needed to do different was just recognize that this was all going on sooner and back off sooner and like catch them later through the corner. But I didn't.
Because you're a rookie.
Yeah, you're just, I mean, it's not like I'm thinking about having won the race at that point. You're just kind of like locked in the moment. You're not aware of what's going on. Didn't have anybody over the radio. Your spotters are mostly telling you what's going on kind of behind you. Like you're the one that's supposed to be responsible for what's going on in front of you, basically. And I had my turn 3 spotter was like, a little questionable whether that was like the right job for that dude at that time anyway. But so tried to go around the outside. You're 30 whatever laps under green. Indy is a 1-lane track. That's a low odds move, but to me it was the only move at that time, and just got in the marble. Like, tried to get as close as I could to the car that I was getting around and not be up in the gray, but got up in the gray, crashed. And then, I remember this all like it was yesterday. You're just like, well, I'm still in the lead of the race and I just got to get to the finish line, So I wooded it.
So you were on throttle. At this point, like the
full throttle.
Front right corner is completely
the whole
destroyed.
Right side of the car is smoked.
Yeah. Like the control arms and everything were disconnected.
The
at this
right
point.
front actually wasn't that bad, but the car's not doing what it would normally be doing at that point.
And you hit. I mean, how fast were you going when you hit?
Probably 200-ish.
I love how you just so casually drop 200 miles. I mean, that is
maybe not quite 200.
What kind of G's is that?
That one's like a hit like that, a glancing kind of situation isn't that bad. I mean, I've had some, you want to talk about big G accidents, like we talk about that, but that's one you don't even think about, basically.
Yeah.
And so, because it was late in the corner too, and like I'm almost to the straightaway, basically, by the time I actually, hit the wall, make contact. Car came out into like the middle of the track, and so I tried to just go to throttle like that. Car's like all over the place. So I steered it back into the wall and drove it as I ended up hitting the turn 1 wall too, which sucked. Basically because I had was still going 180, with 2 wheels on it, across the finish line. But at that point, Dan Weldon he was among the cars that had pitted and was on fresh tires and was chasing us down or whatever. So
I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times. I probably have watched interviews of you being asked this. Do you think if you had parked it behind that lap traffic, Dan would have still passed you? Or do you think that it was going to happen? Second place was going to happen either way.
I don't know.
You either crashed out. I mean, I'm assuming you've thought about this.
Yeah. I mean, it's neither here nor there really. Just in that, I've not gone back and done a super deep dive in the data.
By the way, Reddit has. There's really deep Reddit threads about this.
So this gives you a little bit of the insight of the mindset of a professional racer in this, and
versus the internet,
the fans or whatever. Yeah. To me, it just doesn't really matter. Yeah. I think it's in all likelihood. Well, I'd say this, like I said earlier, for sure, if I had just been eyes up and recognized what was coming at me sooner and just reacted sooner to it, I for sure would have been able to just wait long, get out of it, wait longer, catch that car later in the corner, so you're not getting screwed up by the slipstream and aero wash and all that kind of stuff. That was the risk that I felt like I was going to take. Yeah. By the time I realized what was going on, it was a big closing rate, so it's kind of the cars are not meant to slow down behind another car in the middle of the corner at 200 miles an hour. Right. That's recipe for just getting in your own accident, losing it and getting your own accident. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I think the muscle memory for me was that's just not an option at this point. Yeah, I'm for sure going to crash if I drive it down into the corner right behind this guy, regardless of whatever the math is for if I can re-accelerate. It's a little bit in the back of your mind. I've now spent 30 something laps taking it super easy to not be at full throttle if I don't have to be, right, to not be asking too much of the car if I don't have to, because I'm on smoked tires and at the end of a fuel stint. So my mindset was I got to maintain momentum here basically, and stopping and having to restart. I don't know exactly how far the cars are behind me. You have some sense of it, but your mirrors, I'm not seeing them. Yeah. I'm not paying attention to that. Do your spotters give you splits and stuff, or they do? Yeah. But at that point, it's just mayhem at the end of the race. It's I knew what my splits were coming across the start finish line. I knew I had plenty. If nothing goes wrong, I knew I had plenty of gap. That I could run a really slow final lap if I had to from a fuel economy perspective and would get to the end. Yeah. But once something like that happens, it kind of all goes out the window. You're I don't know. And there was definitely, there was a part of me, Marco Andretti, 5 or 6 years prior to that, 2006, I think, lost the race, was leading the race, final lap, got passed down the front straightaway by Sam Hornish Jr. to lose. And there was just that so totally... Watching that happen was just I am just not ever going to be that guy. Not to single out Marco. Not Marco, but I just don't, that's so not why I'm here. Right. To end up losing because I, piled on the brakes in a situation where maybe that wasn't, my only option. Right. So yeah, it's definitely you went when in doubt, go flat out. Yeah, I went the whatever. What's the worst that happens? I end up in second. I was kind of totally. At that point, I was people talk to me about this all the time. That happens to so many guys, and it just happens in the middle of the race, and you don't even we're not sitting here talking about it because they finished 30th. And I think and look, this is part of the setup for this episode. And I didn't ask you this question because I just wanted to sit here and be hey, let's talk about your most humiliating moment in racing, which really shouldn't be, because you were a rookie who finished second in the Indy 500, which is one of the highest things you can do in motorsport. But I think the reason it stands out is because it was good entertainment. This is the kind of things that people watch racing for, right? No one wants to watch cars get into position and then just watch the laps
count up, right? Like that's not what people want. People want to sit there and say, oh, this could all change in the last lap. This could all, like, you can have these big changes. And I think that's like where certain racing is really successful, because I think it's one of the reasons people like NASCAR, and I'm not a big NASCAR person, but like there's always a big wreck in the last 3 laps. It just happened at Daytona, right? And it's like where everything can change. And I think that those are those things that, you know, we need to talk about it. Like, how is race, not that we want drivers to wreck, but that like things can change quickly. And it's like, this is one of the reasons I brought you on today to talk about that. But I want to hit a few things first. And we don't have to talk about the crash anymore. That's now behind us. But what was your road up to Indy? Because it's actually something you and I've never talked about. Like, where did you come up the standard route of karting? Like, how did that, you get into that? Were you in a family of motorsport? Like, how did you end up there?
No, I mean, so much of what has informed just my perspective, definitely my road and becoming a race car driver in the first place or whatever, was my upbringing. It was not, you know, from a family of racers. My dad had a vintage race car from when I was a kid, so he was a CP. I grew up in the Bay Area, but he had a '68 Camaro that was what had been a race car from when it was new. It was not a Trans Am car, but it ran in that spec. Basically, it was an A sedan car, hill climb, SCCA hill climb car, that kind of stuff. So he raced that still has this car. Raced that in the Trans Am group, in like the vintage Trans Am group, for a long time, up until that group. I mean, we know that group now as being like all of the heavy hitting real deal cars. Like the West Coast Trans Am group is, you know, the real deal, like Budmore, Penske cars, all that kind of stuff. Back in the 90s, it was just kind of like, hobbyist. Whatever. If it's a car that is period correct of this spec, you go run them in that group. These weren't all like $1 million things at that time.
Wasn't cars that are running Goodwood
and
meeting.
So like he raced 6 or 8 times a year, vintage races, mostly just on the West Coast. And growing up in Marin, like, you were 45 minutes from Sears Point and an hour and some change from Laguna. We had season passes to both places. So I mean,
there's season passes for racetracks? I didn't know that was a thing.
This used to be a thing, at least, for
really?
Sure. Yeah.
Like you have a season pass to like go to like the ski. Wow.
Yeah, just any event you know, and you look at it the exact same way. Like, how many events I think I'm going to go to, and you know, whatever. The epic pass of racing. This used to be a real thing.
Now it's like now it's memberships, and it costs hundreds of thousands
it's funny
of dollars,
that
and you have to
my mind,
and you have to buy a condo to belong to it.
I grew up a real hardcore fan, basically, and had, you know, I played baseball really competitively for a long time, but if you'd have gotten in my room when I was 10, I had hundreds of Hot Wheels cars and no baseball cards anywhere, right? Like racing and cars and whatever was just my thing. That was, so in a general sense, that was definitely, you know, bred in me by my dad and my uncle. And, you know, they were like, you know, in Sausalito, California, 2:00 in the morning, setting the timing on the, you know, Camaro in the middle of the night while they're trying to get back up to Sonoma. Like, it was a very kind of blue collar thing in the middle of, you know, an affluent, you know, part of Northern California. But, you know, that was what I grew up on. And so, I mean, I think when I was really young, you could have offered me any path into motorsports and I would have been into it, or even automotive. Like, I liked the idea of being a designer when I was a kid. But they opened up a go-kart. I'd driven go-karts a few times, was always good at it. Like, was you know, and kind of raced mountain bikes and BMX, and so speed and that racing and competition was always, you know, definitely my thing. Did all the early sim racing, you know, way back, like, you know, people who are sim racers would know Sports Car GT and Grand Prix Legends and some of these, the really early games that were
Grand Prix Legends,
like hyper realistic, you know, where it's like hard just to make it around for a lap. And so every time I got in a go-kart, it was like, boom, just right on pace, and I fell in love. Go-karting is like a localized thing, though. Like, if you don't want to spend a ton of money on it, it's not like the basketball court down the street or something. So my path really all started when they opened the go-kart track at Sears Point. That was 2002, 2003 or something. So I was 13 going on 14, started racing then. Came up through the Jim Russell driver's school program there.
Man,
which
I forgot about the
no
Jim
longer
Russell School.
exists.
Yeah.
Was
one of the few open wheel
honestly
courses too, right?
Without that, I don't think I'd be here.
Yeah.
Like it, because I won one of the karting championships. You got a 3-day school for free. Once you did the 3-day school, you got automatic entry into the graduate runoffs, which was just like a shootout at the end of the year every year. I won that shootout, got a free season in the big car. They were rotary powered, like the old Star Mazda car, basically.
Yep.
But wings and slicks, like a real open wheel car. Won that championship. There was another year of racing shifter karts, like go-karting and all of that, but basically followed the Jim Russell scholarship trajectory. Transitioned me basically for free from karts to cars, and then you got some budget to go do whatever with. So I raced Formula 4 in 2000, won the national championship the following year in 2006. Champ Car at that point, Champ Car and IndyCar were separate still.
Yeah, went to Champ Car Indy.
So I was on the Champ Car side of it to start with. So I raced Atlantics for a year and then switched to Indy Lights.
Yep. Super
last minute. That ended up being the year that Champ Car and IndyCar converged. So that was for sure the right call.
Right, that's like 2008.
Because all the guys, most of the drivers that stayed on the Atlantic, stayed on like the Champ Car, because Atlantic still ran that following year, got kind of hung out to dry. So I kind of jumped ship to Indy Lights, not necessarily racing for one of the best teams, but basically got a year under my belt of just racing ovals and doing all that kind of stuff. Because Indy Lights, IndyCar at that time was still a lot of, 50-50 almost ovals and road courses. It's turned much more into like a oval or a road course, street course centric thing by now. But following year, did well enough basically to work my way into what was then the championship, the outgoing champions ride at Andretti Green. So, came into Indy Lights that year. Just if we didn't stick it on the pole and win a race, we were pissed. Like it was one of those kind of seasons. You knew that you had all the tools to go out and crush. And I had a year under my belt in the championship, so I knew all the tracks and knew what I was up against. The car was just bad fast, and so I locked up the championship with like 2 to go, and then interestingly, basically was what I at the time liked to call being a free agent for a year. I was just totally unemployed race car driver for a season after that. After winning the Indy Lights championship, I didn't think it made any sense to go back and do it again just because there weren't openings in IndyCar. There was talk of, at that time I got my F1 test with Force India. There was talk of racing GP2 for the year and that maybe that would circle back to IndyCar or maybe I would just stay in Europe or whatever. Ended up through that season doing some sports car racing and then filling in for Mike Conway. He got hurt at the 500 that year. So at the tail end of the IndyCar season, made my IndyCar debut just as a fill-in. Did well, got hired full-time the following season by Panther Racing with the National Guard sponsorship. And I had kind of I knew that seat was going to open up basically. So I kind of had pushed my eggs into that basket from early on. Like, I'm just going to try to get positioned to be the guy for that seat because I'm a young American guy. That makes sense. They had not yet had an American driver with the National Guard sponsorship, which was kind of funny at the time. Had to audition for it. So we did a test at Phoenix on the short oval there, and halfway through the test they just like told all the other guys to go home.
Sweet.
So that was my like entry point into the series.
Into your rookie year.
Yeah.
And then rookie year, how many more years did you spend in Indy after?
I mean, I've raced 12 Indy 500s.
Okay.
Not racing full time in the series through that whole period. Just you kind of bounce around a little bit on sponsorship stuff and whatever. I mean, I think I'm in one respect super fortunate to have been able to make like a pretty good living for the last 15 years now, just being a hired gun. Like I've made an okay living.
Yeah,
like,
it's not a bad way to live.
Showing up just to do one race a year at Indianapolis, like that event still has enough gravity that like that's possible to do.
Yeah.
And I kind of, it's funny you bring up 2011. there was a period of time where I felt like there was this, like I had to redeem myself or something, I mean, you naturally maybe feel that way about this kind of stuff. But it's funny because people start talking to you about, how different do you think your career would be if you'd have won the race instead of this or that? And, I can think of a bunch of times during my racing career, during my IndyCar career, that I made a mistake or something happened that I wish I could kind of undo,
right?
Because I think it would have been like, if I'd have done that right that day instead of making that mistake, that would have showcased to the people who are going to pay me to come back and do this again that I was better than I was or something, That moment in 2011, I think, partially because I was a rookie, and so just knowing the circumstance of the whole thing, like, if I'd have won the race, to me, that at this point now, like, that would not have been expressive of having more skill, having more whatever. It would have just been like, I don't know, you just make a different choice in the moment or something.
It would have been a strategy conversation.
And so it's an interesting one because just because you get asked these questions all the time, you sort of not like this, but just people ask you about stuff like that, this or that, like what ifs. And I'm like, I don't dabble in the what ifs of this stuff anyway, but I think at the end of the day, what matters to me is, was I actually just good enough to get the next ride and like continue to be able to do it? And, looking back to then, like, I mean, at least at that time I did, right?
Yeah.
Like I was able to do it, 11 more times, and I'm still like waiting on a phone call right now for this year. Like maybe I still just get plugged in because somebody needs a vet that they can just know is going to show up and do the job. So
for me, it's interesting because I was thinking last night as I was making notes for the show of like, where did we first meet? And I could be wrong, so you may know better, but I think I actually met you through Formula Drift.
That sounds right.
Because I think you drove 1 year.
Yeah, I did a couple of events with Tyler in 2013.
Yeah, okay. That probably makes sense. I think that's where I first met you, was through that. And that's where I first met you. But when I think I realized that you and I connected was you came to Hoonigan. And you were like, this is when we were in the 621 building. And you said, I had this idea and I want to talk to you about it. And it was the concept of Rufus. And I don't know how much you want to talk about it. I don't know how much you're free to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I actually want to pin that. We'll talk about it later because I want to get to another thing first. But I walked out of that meeting, and take this as you will, that you were smarter than most race car drivers, because I've spent a lot of time around race car drivers, and not all of them are. They're very focused, and I think there is like a very specific, like, essentially for road racing, I think there's like a very specific type of like archetype of the race car driver.
Yeah.
And you were thinking about stuff that I think most drivers don't ever think about. Because I spent a lot of my time talking to race car drivers saying, you need to think about this. Like, this is what people are looking at. But I walked away from that going, all right, JR's definitely an ally in this. I grew up loving motorsports, but something has changed in motorsports that it's just not as interesting. And I said in a couple episodes ago that I feel like motorsports has an entertainment problem. Like, it's just not as entertaining as it was when I was a kid, right? I grew up, my father's birthday is on the 30th of May. So we would always watch the 500 as like part of his birthday, whether it was the day after, the day before, whatever. Like, that's what my dad wanted to do. We would sit there, we'd watch the 500 together. And, I just, from a little kid, like, I remember sitting there, rooting for, like all these different drivers through. And it was always exciting. There was always something going on. And, I then grew interest in rally racing, DTM, like a lot of touring car stuff is like really, I always like production car stuff, and then started watching Formula One. I started watching Formula One sort of in probably like the middle of the Schumacher kind of era, right?
Sure.
And like really exciting.
Late 90s.
Yeah, late 90s. And, and watched through till like, I don't know, probably like 2009 and then stopped watching. So like now like F1's huge and like I'm not paying attention to it, but like I was there for like Lewis's like, you know, rookie year, and that was really exciting. I was there for Jensen Button's year, which was so unexpected, and but even then I felt like motorsport was losing it. Like I remember going to IMSA races at like Lime Rock and just being like, this is just not like, who's here? Like why does this matter? Why does this matter?
Yeah.
Other than it's a good picnic with like your family. Like, well, like why, like where is the excitement here? And then I got to see it firsthand in WRC as like, you know, Ken and I were trying to tell good stories, and the actual organization was our biggest hurdle.
Right.
Like dealing with the FIA was a hurdle. They tried to fine us once for not sending out a press release. I'm like, why do we have to put out a press release? Like I posted on Facebook, and this was like kind of pre-Instagram. Like trust me, more people saw it on Facebook than a press release. And like, well, that's because that's what you're supposed to do.
I have a million stories
and it's
like that.
Like, why? So this is where I sort of want to, you know, I'd love to have this conversation with you, because you and I have talked about it in a lot of different places, but you know, right here, it's like, can we fix where we are? Right. I think Formula One has seen a shift because they started to invest more in the story of the people, and they realized that worked. Right. I think no one can deny that the Netflix show like was a huge piece for them. But you look at all these other places in motorsports, and it's like everyone's trying to figure out how do we go tell a story? How do we do something different? But I don't think everyone sees all the hurdles that are in the background. Right. And I don't even know where you want to start, because we could start on the cars, the tracks, the way drivers approach it. But like you and I, in talking about Rufus, and we'll get into Rufus later, but basically your concept for Rufus, and I'll just tell it and you can correct me, is like almost was building like a point system around all these other races. And the idea was like, let's build out a way where someone could be a Baja racer, but also compete in these 4 other events, and all of their points kind of create this like, you know, big point system, and this idea of like a real like sort of like race of champions, right? And, you know, and by the way, Rufus is Parnelli Jones's middle name, which I always thought.
Actually his real first name. Parnelli is his middle name.
Oh, okay.
Parnell is his middle name.
Yeah.
Parnelli is like a nickname.
Was the nickname, right? Yeah. So it was Rufus Parnell Jones, right?
Yeah.
By the way, my wife is really good friends with his cousin because he's really into mid-century modern bathrooms, which is really random. But I went to this guy's house. Just real tangent. I went to this guy's house, middle of the pandemic. We had just bought the donk, but like hadn't modified it yet.
Parnelli was up in like Torrance.
He was in this area. So. We had just bought the donk, right, which was I think if I remember correctly, it was 71, and it was stock, but it was really nice. Like we bought this like kind of like perfect car, and I was like, I might as well drive this up. Like he had this like toilet bowl, this like vintage toilet bowl that my wife wanted. So I drive all the way up to the guy like lives up in like I think like Hollywood Hills, maybe Pasadena. I was Pasadena. So I drive all the way up there, and he comes out and he's like, "Man, I haven't seen one of those in like forever." And we start talking, and he starts talking. He's like, "Yeah, you know, I was really into cars, so on and so on. You might have heard of my cousin." I was like, "Oh, who's your cousin?" He's like, "You ever heard of a race car driver named Parnelli Jones?" I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" I was like, "His name." I was like, and I actually said to him, he didn't correct me. I was like, "His middle name was Rufus, right?" He's like, "How do you know that?" Long story.
Well, there's this guy.
There's this guy. But I think that, you know, you have this whole story as a race car driver, but the thing that I find really interesting about you is you think a lot about how do we make racing better. And I think you think a lot about it from the car side. And I think where you and I meet is that I look at it from the storytelling side, right? Like how do we put all those together? And the last, I think, phone call I had with you is I called you and I said, I want to make a documentary called like Motorsports Sucks, and we want to fix it. Right? Like literally just go right at it. And you were like, sign me up. Because I think that's also something that's interesting, is that a lot of race car drivers are afraid to talk about this. Yeah. Because they know it's broken. They know the system's broken, but they don't want to upset anyone and not get a future ride.
You're beholden to it, you know, to a degree. And there is definitely still, you know, Instagram and all of these things, social has definitely put some power of influence back in the hands of the athlete, but motorsport is such a vertically integrated like value chain from a commercial perspective that you still got to get somebody to come up with several $1 million to just even go do the thing, right? Like you're still just, this is not BMX or something where you can just go buy a bike and show up to the X Games if you're great.
Right.
So I think where I want to start, like if you're asking me
where do you want to start?
What the thing is
how
here,
does Brian Scotto and JR Hildebrand fix motorsport in this podcast?
So for me, it's not that motorsports needs saving, because there's a lot of motorsport that's still great. And I also want to, like, I think you and I are both on the same page here, but for the benefit of the audience, like, we're here talking about this. I'm definitely here talking about this. I know you're in the same boat, like, because we love this shit, but we know that there are aspects of it that are broken, and we want to see it be better. Like, this is like, we're not going to gentle parent motorsports here. Yeah. Like, you know, I've done this thing for so long. I've cared about it longer than most of the people that are doing about it. From growing up, you mentioned kind of your entry points into what made you passionate about motorsport, what you're into. I mean, growing up in the night, I mentioned earlier, like between Sears Point and Laguna Seca through the 90s, you saw everything. You got kart, kart, which was the predecessor to IndyCar. CAR Championship Auto Racing Teams. You've got 1,000 horsepower kart cars coming down from the corkscrew at Laguna Seca, like never getting straight because they are just like struggling to get the power down till they're halfway down the front straightaway. Dale Earnhardt, peak Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon era at Sears Point, pounding that turn 3 apex curb every lap. Like, I was that guy, that kid with his dad sitting there just like, damn, like watching that John Force half pass burnouts, like even drag racing has gotten sanitized since like that time back then.
It was the Englishtown crash and they cut it down 1,000 feet. Yeah.
And so, you're, when you've seen a contemporary version of motorsports be this totally radical, raw thing, you just, like, I grew up expecting that by the time that I'm going to race go-karts, I'm going to do this thing, if I make it to being able to participate in this thing, whether that's as a driver, an engineer, whatever, it's going to be at least that awesome to be a part of. And it's just not. The mainstream motorsports, it just straight up objectively isn't. So to me, it's an object in motion will stay in motion, right? Like, these things will continue to happen. To me, it's not motorsport itself that needs saving. It's the soul of motorsport in a mainstream sense that needs saving. And so to me, like, if I'm to try to define that, it's the soul of motorsport broadly is rooted in human expression. And we can think about that as both technical expression, creativity of innovators, like being able to see the way that people think, this group of people, that group of people doing in their approach to a technical, task, that side of motorsport. But that really, when motorsport is at its best, the car should not only be a platform for that, but an amplifier of the human being in the cockpit. Like, I've been lucky to experience this. We've all had these experiences. If you're a driver, even in street cars, you've had this experience. I listen to you guys talk about, the Wright Canyon car, and there's a part of it that's even built into that. Like, the ultimate joy that you have racing, and I've just been able to experience this, I guess, at a really high level, is when you do get in that state of flow and your mind and body are totally aligned and everything else just kind of goes out the window and you're totally in the moment, just feeling this thing happen. You feel like you can kind of sense things happening a little before they do. You're just totally, lined up.
Wait, so you're telling me that the Senna, I see myself from above the car thing is real in racing?
Yeah.
That's like a famous line of his. He said that at a certain point he watches from above.
Well, and I think it's just I don't know that I've ever had a complete out-of-body experience. I'm also not Ayrton Senna, so I can't say that he didn't. But what really makes motorsport special, that's a thing that you hear that feeling get described the same way by athletes,
It's flow state.
Yeah.
I mean, I think,
But the thing that really makes motorsport special is that then you've got this piece of machinery that is an extension of you, as another whole piece of that, and allows you to do these things that as just a regular dude standing here, like, you wouldn't be able to do. Like, it's this amplifier of everything about you kind of flows into the machine. And the more radical, the more excessive, the more visceral the machine is, the more heightened that experience is. But then also from the outside, like looking at this from the perspective of race fans, the more excessive and radical and visceral the machine is, the more apparent it is that that special thing is going on. And what we've like traded the ability for any of that to be legible to the audience for predictable outcomes and manufactured entertainment and like corporate approval across mainstream motorsports. And I want to say that I think that, as far as I'm concerned, that's just like an objective fact. Like, that's what, if you looked at the rules for any of the mainstream things, NASCAR, Formula One, IndyCar, sports car racing even, that those things are what the rules are defined around. They're defined around keeping OEMs happy and like those people engaged in what's going on, and making the racing as close as possible, basically. And all the rest of the shit has like gone out the window. Like, it is not open for creative thinkers to apply their unique point of view to what's going on. They are not like, the vehicle formulas are not built for driver X, Y, or Z to be able to truly showcase greatness and for that to be visible with the naked eye, to the fan. This is not, we're a long ways away from like Ayrton Senna in the early 90s, let alone Ronnie Peterson and Gilles Villeneuve and that kind of vibe back in the day. And so I think one of the things that I think is really worth mentioning, and it's one of the things that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, is like, why? Like, why has it been like this? And I think we can point to a real specific point in time and a thing that happened that within the industry, and I think this is going on in the automotive industry also, like there's an adjacency here with supercars and speed and all of this stuff, that we're just like not in mainstream motorsports, we are just not acknowledging that this has occurred, which is that early 2000s, I mean, I could, in my neck of the woods, in open wheel racing in North America, you could point to a very specific point in time, 2001. That year, we set at Fontana, Gilles de Ferran, close course track record, 241 miles an hour average speed at Fontana that year. That same year, the Champ Car kart race at Texas Motor Speedway got canceled 2 hours before the race because guys were G'ing out in the middle of the corner, like blacking out from too many G's through a corner. Guys basically like that air, that the cars being that fast, it butted up against like the physics-based limitations for what a human could not just safely do, but like physically sustain, right? Without I mean, that race at TMS, they were in Texas, so they had like flight specialists from NASA come and look at the data, and they were like, no, like these guys should be wearing G suits. Like there's no possible way that these drivers will last, any more than a handful of laps at a time doing this. And these kinds of like, the blood is, rushing out of your head basically. And that's because it's banked. But the other factor there was guys, there were crashes where guys died that year. Like just a regular crash. We talk a lot about risk and all this kind of stuff in racing, in the context of, how do you manage like the crazy multi-car accidents and all this kind of stuff? That's one part of the problem. This was a period in time where guys were having like career-ending injuries from just the basic mess up and single car accident at a bunch of tracks during the year. And so there was this, in open wheels terms, there was this really specific point in time. For everything else, maybe it's a little fuzzier exactly when that was, but this all occurred at the same general moment, which was that speed was, rather than being sort of the solution for what made motorsports great, up until then, you've just got this, there's constraints and there's rules and all this stuff, but you've got this ascent of performance. Like there's a clear North Star for what all of these different championships are all about. It's like, well, this is like about the pursuit of speed.
Right.
Like, that's what we're here to do. And
let me ask you a quick question there. Do you think the pursuit of speed was the right pursuit for motorsports through that period?
I think in any form of motorsports, if you can look at it as a horizon that you can continue to chase, as opposed to a ceiling that you're going to get to a point where it's just like no longer feasible, then I do. Like, I think Bonneville, Pikes Peak, places where it's like, this is just about how fast you get from point A to point B, do it however you want.
Yeah.
And maybe, there's like a cultural element of like, how much do we tolerate unnecessary risk? I think that gets less and less every year or something. But when you're talking about these kinds of mainstream championships, you get to a point literally where it just can't be done anymore. You can't continue to pursue it.
The thing I think about with this a lot, though, because for me, I think that the speed thing, and we may be saying the same thing, but I think you get to a point where the speed is no longer relatable, or it doesn't really matter, right? Like the difference between you doing 200 on an oval and 240 is not noticeable to the eye. Like it doesn't. I mean, maybe to you, but I think to the
200 and 240 is a lot, but
like maybe
220 and 230 or something.
230 or something like that.
Like
those small little sides. Like I just don't know if the regular viewer or the audience that is watching this understands that on that level. And one of the things I go back to is, why do we have this nostalgia for a slower time? Right? Like for example, Group B. It gets talked about all the time, right, from rally. Group B. The modern rally car is so much faster, especially the Aero era of the modern WRC car is so much faster than Group B cars. I mean, it's not even close. But there is this mindset that people think that the Group B cars were so much faster. And it's like, they're not. They were like, they were beasts, and they were scary in the time because they didn't have the technology to match the power they had. But they're nowhere near as close to what a modern WRC car is. But there is something about Group B that just felt better, and just was more exciting. And I think that there's this like, it's a ratio of power to the other parts.
I totally agree with that, and I think we are saying the same thing. I'll try to wrap the point so we can sort of unpack it, which is, I think that motorsport. The point that I'm really making about this kind of 2001 era is basically just that up until then, the speeds they were tailing off anyway at that point. Like, this was a thing that was going to inevitably occur one way or the, I mean, NASCAR had already started restrictor plate racing, all that kind of stuff, because they went 211 at Daytona in like the late 80s.
Right.
And they haven't even touched it since then. They got to the point way earlier that it was like, oh my God, like these things are going to be, I mean, this is like,
and they're running like steel wheels,
insane.
like fiberglass bodies.
You look
on
at those
tubes.
cars, they're like, holy shit, like I can't believe those guys are doing it.
Oh, hey, what's up? Here we are with another Storytime interruption brought to you by my good friends at FCP Euro. Look, if you've spent any time in the Euro scene, you have heard the term OEM Plus. Okay, for those of you who don't know, OEM Plus is modifying your car with just OEM parts, usually taken from either a higher spec car or a newer car. To most people, it is the morally superior way to modify a car and still consider yourself a purist. Anyway, back to what we were saying. The other day, driving the S8, it was brought to my attention that it needed new brakes. And I thought, I probably need to fix these. But why fix these when you can upgrade these? I found a bunch of big brake kits I could go buy, but then I realized that there was a really good OEM Plus option, which was upgrading to the next generation D3, either A8 or S8 brakes. I started looking on Marketplace. That's usually where I go. And it occurred to me, you know what? FCP Euro probably has most of what I need, and they did. Head over to fcpeuro.com, filled the cart, and surprisingly, it was not that much more than buying the parts used. That's right, I was able to get brand new parts to do this great OEM Plus upgrade, all from FCP Euro, brand new. If you too want to mod your car and you like the OEM Plus route, remember, you can go to FCP Euro and find a lot of those OEM Plus upgrades right there if you know what you're looking for. FCPEuro.com for those of us who have an affliction for European cars.
So the point basically is just that, like, to try to talk about why is it the way that it is today, I think we have to acknowledge that up until this point in the early 2000s, where everything, you and I think would both objectively sit there and go, if you just looked at most of the racing that was going on through like the late 90s, you think this was pretty badass. Like, this is cool stuff. They just didn't have to think about it. Like, the rules were, if you're ascending the ladder of speed, then it's just naturally kind of raw and unrefined if you're doing that, right? And so, but then it was like, oh no, wait, like, we gotta back this thing down. Like, this has gotten out of control, and that there was not at that time, nor is there still today. This is the uncomfortable part. Nor is there still today really any mechanism for making that any more safe. Like, there's not, up through that point in time, safety innovation was kind of following along with cars getting faster in a way that continued to enable it. Now it's like, well, what? So are we actually just going to wear G suits? So then what happens when every crash is 100 Gs? Right. I mean, that's like, every time somebody gets in an accident, it's concussion and broken back. I mean, that's the kind of Formula One is in the same. All of the major championships are in the same boat, whether it's oval racing or road course racing. And so I think to just tie a bow on this part, what I think has happened, like why racing is where it's at now, and why like you and I both look at it and go like, what is this even? Like what am I supposed to get out of this? And it's and we're talking about the mainstream stuff. There's still trophy trucks and there's all kinds of other shit going on that doesn't fit in this category, I think. But the mainstream things, they've had to like suck down control to figure out, all right, well, we have to back it down without that pre-existing North Star that just kind of makes everything work. It's just like, well, whatever we decide the rules are, if we're still on this trajectory, then like whatever they are basically was always pretty cool, no matter what direction they kind of, bent it off into. Now you got to make some actual proactive choices about why the thing is whatever it is. And at that time, and I think for the last 25 years, basically, we've chosen a path to try to create entertainment in the form of racing that's as close as possible all the time. Like it's taking the idea that restrictor plate racing in NASCAR is successful motorsports entertainment, and it's kind of applying that general ethos to everything. And
to pause you real quick, because I'm curious, what do you think entertainment is in racing? Like because I hear this a lot, which is like close racing is entertainment, and I think there's elements of that. But as someone who, my favorite racing is actually solo. Like, I love touring car. Like that, like to me, DTM, British touring car, like cars hitting each other, like that, like Nigel Mansell era, like that stuff was just fantastic, right? And that's probably one of like the peak ones for me. But I like rally racing. I like hill climb. Like a lot of things I like is just the car. And for me, and not to answer this before giving it to you, but for me, it's not always about like the door-to-door element of it. I think it's like the characteristics of how the car moves is a big part of it for me.
I think to me, so that gets back to what we've sort of traded. We've bought ourselves really close racing where there's a lot of cars that are really evenly matched, that are really close together. We've traded that for being able to tell why whatever is going on is going on. So guy X wins the race. Like, is that because he did a really good job? Is that because he was driving better than the other guys? Like, when they all just look like slot cars going around the racetrack, you can't tell.
Right. And
so I think that's we're sort of circling around the same thing here, which for me just goes back to the fact that this whole thing matters if it can be an expression of human greatness. If you can actually tell what's going on here, if you can tell that there's a person there doing something remarkable, that's what makes it matter. Like, that's why rally, even in a high aero state, is still great. Yeah. Because you're kind of like, well, I watch that, like my feed, my Instagram feed is just full of trophy trucks and rally cars, basically. Because I'm kind of like I watch the rally stuff and it's just like, I'd love to do that, but there's no fucking way you'd put me in that car and I'd be as good as those guys that have, like, it's just apparent to me. Whereas I think you watch a lot of other stuff and you'd kind of be like, what makes this hard to do? Like, you watch a lot of mainstream racing, and I can tell you without question, all the tech in the cars, you watch the F1 guys, all of that stuff, all of that is just making it harder for those guys to actually just get into their flow state to go drive the car, for one. Like, it's taking away from the actual experience that the drivers are having.
I listened to in-car.
This is the same thing for your street car.
I listened to in-car radios today and versus years ago, where, like, no one's talking to the driver. Yeah. And that's like the way Kimmy like tells the driver to shut the fuck up and let me drive. Leave me alone. Doing. And like, I love that, because that's what I think racing was back in the day, where now there's so much data. There's so much statistics. There's all these things to try to get that little edge. And everyone's like looking for the edge. And I get that part in motorsports, right? But it also seems that and you know, you've driven these cars, but it seems like we've moved to a point where it's more about the technology of the car than it is the driver. Yeah. And that's a major shift. And I would imagine, and I'd love your opinion on this, but I would imagine that is created by the people who are paying for this.
Yeah, it's just like one of these things that we've just ended up with it without any North Star. Like, so I guess the point here I'm making is, like, we need to define a new North Star, because it's not going to be just the outright pursuit of speed. That ship sailed.
So what is it?
And so for me, it's that we have to showcase, like, it's the same as any sports, basically. Like, you have to showcase human greatness. Like, you have to be able to tell when somebody's doing something really incredible in a race car. You have to create a platform for that to be able to be witnessed, to be seen. And in the absence of looking at it that way, that was a thing that was just like naturally occurring for a long time. Like, we didn't have to design for it. Now we do. Like, we've got all of these, because we've ended up in this spot where there is no North Star, we've got all of these vehicle formulas across mainstream motorsports that are stagnant. Like, they basically just stay the same for a long time. So there's no change, really. They're aimless. Like, they kind of ping pong, like, oh, we'll do it a little more this way, we'll do it a little more that way, but there's no through line to, like, why they are whatever they are over like a 10-year span. They're watered down in terms of what the actual thing is. Like, that's just what is it now compared to what it was in like the late 90s. And they're way over-engineered, kind of to your point about all of this other stuff.
Do you think the over-engineering comes from the manufacturers? Like, that it validates the spend to say, we're going to go here, we're going to create this amazing tech, and this is the story as to why we race?
I mean, man, I think that just comes from, it's a competitive thing. If you let it be open in those places, technology is going to find its way in. But we've reached this, again, I think the same is true for like road cars. We've reached this state of abundance where, like, in my daily life, I'm sitting here every day just trying to figure out, like, should I be peeling that layer back, actually, rather than piling on more tech, more stuff, more, whatever? And the same is true here. Like, at the end of the day, what I'm calling for here is, look, we need to just acknowledge that this is the case, that we are where we are, that there is a ceiling to how fast we can basically allow the cars to go. There's like a physics-based human limit to how fast the cars can go. If we don't want to have to redesign every track on the planet. Here,
or basically just turn it into a gladiator sport where race car drivers die every week, like it was in the 50s and 60s.
And that's just not a thing, right? Like, we're never going to go back to that. Nobody will let that happen. Nobody's going to be able to take out insurance policies on the tracks, on the sanctioning bodies. Like, this is enough of a business at this point now that, like, we're just, so those things to me are like, forget it. Like, don't even think about it. The basic formula here is just appreciate that this is what it is. Appreciate that this can't be about speed. So stop trying to be performative about the fact that this is still like that by keeping the cars kind of looking and feeling and maybe sounding the way that they did when everybody thought it was great. And start from first principles and say, what's actually the best way for this to work? Part of that is defining what the entertainment value is. To me, I'm like, how do we get back to having Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods kind of moments here?
Agreed.
Where is that part of this?
Yeah.
And that comes from get rid of the fucking downforce,
Yep.
add power, add some more, and figure the rest of it out so that you've got a package that can't be watered down, that can't be easy to drive, that like if you're great, you will unquestion that it doesn't really matter what team you're on or like who has the best engineer or whatever by as much. Make it so the base thing to do is super excessive.
So bring back Can-Am racing.
But give it like a modern fluff. Like I think that's the part of this that we don't even know what that looks like anymore.
Right.
You know, we don't know what it's been so long since that would, because the other piece of this now is that just because the cars slowed down, technology kept going like this.
Yeah.
And so now the gap between, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, like, you know, Formula One cars, Indy cars, those two in particular, they were probably pretty close. Like if you just said no rules, those cars that were actually racing were probably pretty close to like the no rules version of those cars in terms of how fast they went. Now, that gap is enormous. And so there's this huge white space between where the cars are and what they could be in any particular facet, tire tech, engine tech, chassis tech, aero tech, all of this stuff. There's this big white space to say, well, we could kind of twist all of these knobs in any variety of directions, and it doesn't really change the cost of doing this, doesn't change the access to resources, doesn't change any of that stuff. And we could just make the baseline from, I mean, WRC, I think about this with that too. To your point, they're in the same boat. WRC to start with is like definitely just a more excessive and kind of radical thing to see being done. But why not have like a group B? Why not take the aero off?
Yeah.
And give the cars another 200, get rid of the fucking hybrid units. Like that's all corporate approval.
That's all manufacturer
performance.
created because
Like that's not a thing.
It's how they spend money out of buckets.
The number of cars, the number of professional race cars out there that are getting worse gas mileage, going slower, less efficient because they've got a hybrid, because they've been electrified is like mind-numbing to me.
But that's all because some executive said, the only way we can spend money on this year is if you make it green or friendly or whatever.
And so I think what I'm asking for of motorsports is, and just, you know, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but like I'm starting to just take this into my own hands. But what I want from motorsports is honesty about what are we doing and why are we doing it? And so what should the baseline thing, what is the best version of that as like the first principles thing in each of these areas? And let's move back in the direction of this being about human expression. Like that's what makes sports great, you know, and that in the form of motorsports is at its best when we also get to see that on the technical side, which is not a thing that happens anymore either because the rules are so heavily constrained.
You know, it's an interesting thing again on the rally side. I got into rally in the 90s mostly because Speed Vision aired WRC and I was in college and I had Speed Vision. So the Colin McRae's and things like that, like, you know, Petter Solberg, like this was sort of that era, like coming into early 2000s. And I loved rally and it just seemed so cool to me, right? I like production car based stuff. And then went and worked in the WRC, and Sebastian Loeb was this, you know, it was this really interesting thing because I'll argue most people that Sebastian Loeb was the greatest race car driver to ever live, right? I mean, he was unbeatable unless there was snow, but he was unbeatable. It was like you showed up to WRC to finish second when Loeb was there.
Yeah.
And then he went and raced Le Mans and he did all this other stuff. And it's like he probably would have been successful in open wheel and all these other things if he gave it the try. He just really loved rally. But his driving style was the most unentertaining driving style because he realized that he could understeer into a corner, set the car up, and then drive out and be faster than all the drivers who came before him, which was totally sideways.
Big huck. Yeah.
And it's a weird thing to sit there and say, this man is probably one of the greatest drivers to ever be in the sport. But his driving style, in some ways for me, like, I don't want to say ruined the sport, but it was definitely a demotion of what it was, because other drivers started driving that way. And I remember at one point, like, we're at a test and Ken was trying to understeer into corners. I'm like, what are you doing? Like,
this is so bad for our YouTube views, Ken.
Yeah, don't you realize that why people love you is because you might be in 8th place, but you are backwards into the spectator area, and like that's what makes it exciting, where watching someone push into a corner and then drive out of it is not exciting, right?
Yeah.
And this is this interesting thing, because I think it's similar to your point of, okay, there's only so much speed we can go to. But we also get to a point where it's like, if you're always trying to be faster, sometimes the fastest way is tidy and clean, and that doesn't look as good.
Yeah.
So then you get into these other questions of like, okay, well, can we make the tires not as good? Which is what I think you see in Indy, you see in F1, where they're basically driving on horrible rubber. That like, it's always funny to me because I think about this from the tire companies, where it's like, we're going to ask you to make a shitty tire. To
make it shittier. Can you make it shittier?
You are a premium tire company, Pirelli, Michelin, whoever. We want you to make the worst tire possible, and then we're going to throw so much aero on it to try to hold the car to the ground.
And that's what I think is so backwards, because it's like, even in the context of rally cars, I mean, and this is universally basically the same for everything, which is that risk and danger and crash, they come from crash energy, right? Like, so if I'm thinking about circuit racing stuff, we'll keep it you know, contained in that. What keeps the speed from being able to go up? It just, I think we're on the same page here that that's a little bit of a red herring as a global thing, but the thing that keeps you from being able to twist the knob in that direction is that you crash in a corner. Like, yeah, you could crash on a straightaway. It's possible that happens, but that's not what anybody's indexing on in terms of, you know, when we're figuring this. If you crash on a straightaway, it's not going to be a big G hit because it's not a high angle hit and all the rest of this stuff. You crash in a corner, the more downforce a car has, the faster it goes through the corner. Like, that's the place that it goes faster. So it's kind of like this inverse thing to being able to figure out how to do it any differently. My call here is like, well, what's wrong with trimming the downforce way back so that you just can't go any faster in the corner? And then you have the ability to like turn the wick up in a bunch of other places. You end up with a situation where the cornering may be slower, but on the limit way earlier.
Right.
Give the car some of that mechanical advantage back, so that rather than being on shitty tires with a thing that as soon as, I mean, driving an Indy car, driving any high downforce car, I mean, sports cars are like this these days too, but except that they've got traction control and ABS and all the other stuff, which is like a whole other conversation. You know, any of the open wheel cars, it's like either it's stuck or it's unstuck. Yeah. And that's kind of that, you know, like maybe you get a chance to catch the wiggle, but it's a thing that is impossible to tell what's going on. I think it makes the drivers look worse than they are, because you're just like, oh, that guy just completely lost it.
Well, look, I constantly...
That was that. Yeah. Whereas a different version of this is you give the car a really good tire, you take away so much downforce that you're still like at a lower peak high-speed grip level through the corner. So you're still at a lower peak speed, but the cars move around and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I've seen like regional rally cars that they're just like, okay, well, we can do whatever we want. So, you know, I saw this guy that had like an ex Hyundai WRC car that has like 800 horsepower but kind of doesn't have all the shit hanging off of it. And I'm just like, sign me up.
It's probably a blast to drive.
It's so badass because the thing's just because it's traction limited everywhere. Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, it's not gonna. It's probably just slower, like everywhere. Yeah. You know, like there's nothing. There's nothing wrong with that.
And this goes like I say this all the time. I just think slow cars fast is way more fun than fast cars slow. Yeah. And obviously, I think in the racing world, you're driving fast cars fast, but there's something about this nostalgia around, and we keep going back to the 90s, and I don't know if it's our age or maybe that's just the end, right? Like, and because we also talk about it from like a production car side. I would say like 2005 is sort of the end of like really good driver's car, right? Like Vinny's whole driver's era is based on this idea that the mid 2000s is when we start to see the fall off. We start to see way too much traction control that can't be defeated. We see with the removal of manual transmissions. We see all the things that, to your point, makes the driver the important part of the equation disappear, right? And I think we've seen that go from production to racing, or maybe it went the other way. Maybe it went from racing to production, but we're seeing this world of like, it's more about the machine than it is about the person. I only drive old cars because I enjoy that piece. And I went out, we did this track day thing, and I got to drive a TCR, which was like super fun, but it was on slicks. I don't have much experience on slicks. And I would have rather have driven the car on street tires or like, an R compound type thing, because I enjoy the progressive, like wall of like, I could slide this car out and then and hold it and then keep going, versus like the minute I went too hard, I spun. Yeah. Because I wasn't used to that. And obviously, it's something I would learn, but like, I think there's something in just general motorsports where like we've made the cars be perfect, and when they're not perfect, you are so beyond the limit of what that car should be doing that it's off. And this is why every single week in Angelo's Crest, someone crashes a GT3 RS, because that car is amazing. But the minute you lose it, you are now well beyond the point of ever being able to bring the car back. And I think that is this, like, you're leaning on the car so much that it's not as much the driver. And I don't know, maybe I don't think I stand alone, but I go back and I watch vintage racing, right? Whether, it's like old touring car stuff, old open wheel stuff, whatever. And it just seemed more visceral.
It
looked like the drivers were hanging on for dear life. And I don't know why we left that, right? And they were going slower. I think you could take the modern safety that we've learned, because I think we've really learned how to put a driver through a bad crash and have them walk away. I think that's super important, that you could take the safety part, but remove some of the, whether it's the aero grip or the traction control or all the other things where the cars do feel a little bit looser and the cars move around track a little bit more. And it looks like the driver is working, because I want to say, like, I haven't really thought about this until this podcast, because to me, I so much have the view through the camera lens, right? Like, what does that car look like? Like, I want to see the car do cool stuff. I want to see the car feel aggressive. I miss the days of watching cars go up, Mercedes 190s on two wheels through the curb. Like that. There's just something so cool about that, right? And I think it's why Instagram accounts like Patina Research and Japanifornia all have so much success, because people are like, ooh, like that looks so exciting. You know how slow that E30 was going? That thing was not moving. But it looks like it's moving, right? And I think this is one of those things that, like, how do we all agree that may actually be a better formula than this new formula, which is all about math, right? Like, it can go this fast, it's this many G's. But if you have to tell the audience why it's cool,
you've lost already.
You've lost them already, right? And I think that this is, my dad, by the way, huge, both my mom and my dad were into open wheel racing when I was a kid. My mom, I think, had a crush on Mario Andretti when she was younger, and that just like kind of like connected this thing.
Understandable.
But my mom loved Indy. My dad loved Indy. So like we watched a lot of races as a kid, but my dad doesn't watch Indy anymore. He watches NASCAR. And the reason he watches NASCAR is because there's a little bit more of it. He's retired now.
Sure.
I never thought my dad would watch NASCAR. It just wasn't something that he was into. It wasn't something I was into, but he enjoys it because there's more like there's more explanation of the tech. He enjoys the driver stories more. There's just more of a story to follow. And I think NASCAR's in an interesting place right now, because I have sat in multiple meetings with NASCAR of like, how do we fix NASCAR? How do we fix NASCAR? And this year it seems like they've been doing a bunch of things. I don't know if you saw Cletus McFarlane raced the event past weekend.
Travis and Cletus.
Yeah, Travis and Cletus. And look, Travis, like, it's cool to see Travis there, but Travis has done this before. He's pushed for it before. Cletus was interesting. I was looking at some of the stats, like he's in an ARCA race, and like the viewership is like through the roof, because they're bringing in a person that people like want to go see. Did he do well? No, but like that, it was an interesting thing. They're trying different things to get there. But it was actually, what was interesting was we're all talking about a lower level of racing for them, right? We're not talking about Cup. We're talking about the lower levels because there was an interesting story there that we want to see. And so for me, and I'm tanging a bit, but I think the pieces that are important for me are there has to be story, right? And this is why I opened this podcast asking you about your moment, because the reason it is remembered and the reason people want to talk about it is because it feels like something out of a movie. Yeah. Right? It feels like the way a movie would end. You unfortunately, you would have been the villain.
It's a drama.
You would have been the villain, and it would have been from Dan's perspective. But like, it was definitely a drama. Like, it was like, that's high stakes. Like you were, or it would have been your first race, and then you go and, you redeem yourself later, and, and the right coach comes in, you have this moment. But I think that there's a human piece of that we buy into. I think that part's really important. I think the visual is really important. I think we lost the visuals. Like, I don't understand how we have the best cameras in the world now, and we have all this stuff, and motorsport, like the way we cover motorsports just feels lacking. Yeah. Right. And then lastly, which is a part that I never really thought about as much because I'm not a driver, and maybe I don't think about it from that way, is that it needs to be driver first and car second. Because I do agree people buy into the person, and I think for the past 20 years, we have been putting way too much stock in the performance of the cars. It makes 1,000 horsepower. It does this. It can do 200 and whatever miles an hour. Like, you think about all, like, the series wants to sell the stock in the machine. Yeah. That would be the equivalent of basketball talking about the balls and the hoops, or baseball being like, you see this Louisville, it's one of the greatest wooden bats ever. Like, we don't care about that as much. Yeah. And even cycling, like I love cycling and I care about the bikes.
Yeah, same.
But like Tour de France isn't talking about how great this new chassis, like how, like, look at this frame, carbon. They'll mention it, but it's about the rider. Yeah. Right. There's something about motorsports where, because I think there is a general attraction to the sheet metal that is the car, that we now talk too much about the car, and we've lost the people story. And just to finish real quick, and I think that's why F1's working again, because Drive to Survive made people care about the people, and now you start to pay a little bit more attention to that. But imagine putting them in a car where you can actually visually see the differences of the drivers more.
Well, I think that's the thing here is, like, Formula One, I was actually looking at the Liberty deck, like a month ago or something, and it's talking about, it was basically framing a bunch of things about F1, like, that they've done over the last 8 or 10 years or whatever it's been, and so that they could talk about what they're going to do with MotoGP. So it was interesting. Mm-hmm. So they're sort of even talking about the things that they've done with F1 in a slightly different way, because they're trying to, like, make sense of how they're going to apply this model to MotoGP. MotoGP, awesome.
Do you think Liberty is doing a good job of promoting the series?
Well, look, what I think Liberty is doing an incredible job of, and that's what the deck sort of showcases, is they're basically not messing with the on-track product pretty much at all. Mm-hmm. So they're sort of not doing any of the things that we're talking about here. Right. But and so this is to illustrate, I think, sort of the same point, which is, they're bringing in, that's not keeping them from bringing in these storytelling elements. And so they're showcasing that there are all of these other things that I think about more as, like, business factors, in terms of what's going on here, but towards fandom, that elevate the thing and create these stories and showcase that this is, like, a thing that's worth spending your time on, like, and in their case, spending money on. The really interesting part of the deck is that, sort of, in order to make the point that they are increasing the valuation of all of these things, that the teams are, like, have 3x'd over the last 10 years. The, sport itself has 3x'd in its valuation over the last 10 years. They sort of have to point to the fact that, in essence, the core television distribution is the same. Right. That it's not because it's not because there are more people that really deeply care about it that are watching it, that have become attracted to it. There's just an incredible increase in their ability to monetize the people that are there and get this peripheral audience that like wants to be a part of Formula One.
And it's hype, right? I mean, I think that's one of the big things about it. It's hype right now. You've got rappers showing up and being in the paddock.
Yeah, it's the cool thing to go be a part of. And I think that's where I think that motorsport doesn't need saving, because it's going to have that going for it. It's a cool thing to be a part of and do whatever the version of it is. But if we're going back to the expectations that you and I have of it, and there's millions upon millions of other people that are in this boat, we are the people that they depend on to show up and pay to watch it on TV, because they need people who really care about it to sit down and watch it for 3 hours. And that's still their primary income source for all of these sanctioning bodies. Like, okay, well, get down to it and make the core thing super compelling also. You know, like, you've shown that you can package all of this other stuff using new media and these kind of different strategies. Great. Now make the thing so that this Max Verstappen, V. Lewis, or whatever that combo of people ends up being, is like, can't take your eyes off of it, blockbuster television, just having one car on track in qualifying at a time. Like, if F1 could be that in the next regulatory cycle, IndyCar could be that in 2 years from now, NASCAR could be that, it doesn't take long to make that shift to get back to that kind of thing. And from that's and I wrote about this for Road and Track when Ken passed away. Like, that was always my takeaway from Gymkhana. Gymkhana is, like, going back to the very beginning, my thesis for what defines the soul of motorsport being rooted in human expression. Gymkhana is that to 11, like, you can just, and it's artistic, it's creative on the car side, the driving is style, personality, skill, all of these things that you want to get from regular motorsports, you could find it in Gymkhana. And it pisses me off that, like, motorsports didn't take anything away from that. They look at that, they look at Formula D, they look at these things going on as like, well, that's something completely different. There's nothing for us here.
I had this conversation with, Will Rogate. Yeah. We just had this conversation last night about how I went to go have a lot of meetings and consulting with NASCAR on things they could do and stuff. And I will tell you, not only was I never a NASCAR fan, like, I had a T-shirt that said "boring" in the NASCAR font that Ken bought me when I first met him, because it wasn't my kind of motorsports. I was a Euro snob, and I enjoyed the Euro. I enjoyed that. I've learned to appreciate NASCAR more as my father has, because it's forced me to sit and watch whole races with him, and you start to pay more attention to it. But getting someone to sit down and watch something is, like, the hardest part, right? I think for us with the Gymkhana stuff and everything we were doing there, it was like, hey, this is something that is from people who came to motorsports from outside of motorsports. Like, the realization that motorsports isn't fun was really upsetting for Ken. He's like, wait, you're telling me I can't, like, because he was doing donuts and they told him not to. Yeah. Because we have to do, like, a tread depth test on the tires, and that's going to offset, like some.
We went through this. I had GoPro as a sponsor, and you couldn't ever get GoPros on the car. It was either some media rights thing that they wanted GoPro to spend. Right. And I'm like, guys, just let them put this on it's practice. Yeah. Let them put a lap on their YouTube page. Or the team, like, nope, can't put a GoPro there. Nope, can't put a GoPro there. Like, that's screwing up the arrow on the car,
But where I was originally going with this, I kind of forgot my own, was that Will and I had this conversation of, like, I went and I had all these meetings with NASCAR. I think there were some people who really got it, right? Yeah. And I think some of them in there, like Ben, like a few of the guys I think really get it. But there were other people who were still living off the success and the laurels of the 90s and hadn't realized that the party was over. Like, no one realized that the lights had been turned on. They're no longer pouring drinks. Yeah. Go home. And because of that, they're not changing, because, like, they all live in the same fucking town in NASCAR, which is so weird. Yeah, like, they all live there.
Everything is this way.
That whole world is so, if you're living in it, it's successful. Everyone's making money, like, or mostly, like, drivers are surviving. But they weren't realizing that they were losing that exciting era of the 90s. Like, you think about how that was for NASCAR. And then while I wasn't into NASCAR, I was certainly aware. I mean, the jackets were cool. Like, kids were wearing the tie jacket, like, and the DuPont jacket in New York City on the street. Like, there was, like, it was a cultural element. in the way that I think F1 has become a cultural element right now. But the thing that I think one of the number one things to get out of the way is that there is a group of people who work in all of these organizations who just either have blinders on or they're just so in the business that they don't see what's happening outside and they don't want to make those changes. And I think when you saw, because I saw this firsthand because everybody brought us in. Yeah. You guys are the Gymkhana guys. How do you do this?
Yeah.
And when we would start to explain to them what they needed to do, they're like, no, that's too much work.
Right.
And you're like, no, but you don't understand. Like, you need to peel back all these pieces and fix the core problem. Like, they thought we would just come on and we would do a Gymkhana event in the middle of the race, and now all of a sudden everybody's going to love it. And you're like, no, that's not, like, it's going to take more than that. Like, you got to think about these other pieces, and you also have to think about the way people are consuming content and all of this. And it made me walk away, and this is where I wanted to land from this. It made me walk away thinking, I don't know if you can fix, I do that with air quotes, the current sanctioning bodies, or if it's almost easier to create a new one. Because if you think about motorsports started as a way to, because let's be honest, motorsports is a business of entertainment. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that, and you get into it and it becomes like the Olympics, which is also a business of entertainment. But I think you get into this idea of like, we have to win because winning is important, versus realizing that if people stop watching, sponsors stop paying, and the business goes away. So like, job one is that it has to be entertaining.
Has to be great for fans.
Has to be great.
Period. Yeah.
To begin with, it was to put butts in seats. Right? Like, that was job one. Racetracks were built. They wanted to be able to do that. Then the television came, and now it was, okay, now the money model is we're going to get viewers and we're going to sell advertising to the viewers.
Yep.
That was already an adaptation of the butts and seats model. Like, they didn't really change much from butts and seats. They're like, okay, we're now just going to film what is happening here and tell it away. No one sat there with motorsports and said, we're going to make motorsports for television. I think there's some stuff that like maybe was somewhat modeled around it, but in general, most of the motorsports we talk about today all predate television, right? Like, at least in the level that they became in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which was like peak television sort of era.
I would only just add to that super quick that I think that you're 100% right, and that the things that are mainstream now, like mainstream TV stuff, I would honestly argue that those were just the things that happened to fit like a primetime TV window the best on the weekend. Like, in the 60s, there was not this crazy stratification of, you know, F1's like way up here and all this other stuff is way down here.
And that was sort of the Rufus concept.
It was much more like event-based, that it was just like, well, what are the things that just matter the most? Those are the things that people care about the most, because it's all like print media and how many people show up to the event that dictate how much people care. So
so that's a good point. So you're saying
I'm fully on board with that.
Like, drag racing, F1, Indy, NASCAR, right? Rally touring, all of this stuff existed before television.
Yeah.
And then it gets televised. No real sports new come up during that at least still existed today. Obviously, there's like Stadium Super Truck, which I thought, like, you know, the original version of that, which was Mickey Thompson's, right? Mickey Thompson. Like, that was something that was more focused on TV and was really entertaining and fun to watch. Obviously, it fell apart for different reasons. Which is a whole side point, but I want to do a documentary on Mickey Thompson as a person.
God.
And then,
amazing.
He was like executed outside of his house with his wife, like a gangland style shooting. No one talks about this. Like, am I just like, am I crazy that like no one?
How he's one of the like forgotten figures of motorsport.
He would show up to meetings with like really big execs, order a well done steak, cover it in ketchup, and then put ice cream on top of it. This man was insane, but insanely beautiful. Anyway, total tangent side note. At some point, I would love to tell. I think a Mickey Thompson buyout or like movie would be. He's just he was an engineer or driver, created events. He was doing everything.
Yeah,
he was doing it. Anyway, side point on that. But then we go from television into early social media.
Yeah.
Right, which like we all forget about now, but the blog era where magazines weren't working, like we're all trying to figure it out, and now we're in the social media world, and there's really not been a sport that has really, I think, looked at that and said, how do we create how do we create something to live in the modern world of consumable content? And when we were
not in its core structure for
its
sure.
core structure, and when Ken and I were looking at Gymkhana Grid, right? So Gymkhana Grid, I don't know if you know the quick story, but the quick history was Gymkhana USA was an event that they brought over from Japan, this Gymkhana event, and they ran it here in California. Ken had an extra STI that me and him did one lap with, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to go race this event. I think this will be really fun." He went, he did one event, it was fun, and then he threw a ton of money to go do the second event. The second event was canceled. And that's how Gymkhana practiced. That's how the whole video series started, was because Ken just was trying to do more driving while he wasn't racing rally. I mean, that was like, it was such a simple, basic concept. And then, but his issue with it was that it wasn't fast enough and it like wasn't exciting enough. So the first Gymkhana practice was like his reinterpretation of what this Gymkhana sport, which was basically autocross with sliding, right?
Yeah,
traditional
very
Gymkhana.
tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
which has been around since, the 50s. I mean, I have old, car and drivers from the 70s that are like advertising the Corvette with Gymkhana suspension.
You still see guys doing this in like Caterham 7s and
of course,
all
big
that
over there,
stuff.
like Auto Park in the UK, and it was big obviously, in Japan. It's obviously comes from a horse obstacle course style thing. But in creating that, when we first started building the sport the first time around, it was really an answer to the Gymkhana films have gotten so big. Other people want to do it. Let's like sort of revive this. And then we came to a moment where we realized we didn't want to be event organizers or a sanctioning body. And it was way more work than we had initially taken on. So we kind of took the IP, we gave it to Monster Energy. They ran it in Europe for a bunch of years and with quite success, and actually developed like a whole sort of subset of drivers who were drift guys who wanted to be more competitive against time and ended up there. But one of the things that never came to fruition was, as Ken started to realize he was going to retire, we started talking about like, okay, what's next, right? And I mean, honestly, if Ken would have won the last ARA championship, which like he lost by like a point or two, that probably would have been his retirement. Like he just was trying to get that. And like to your redemption point, he had always been the bridesmaid, never the bride, and was always like missed it by like a couple points. And he just wanted to get that championship in his belt. And I think that would have been retirement for him. And we would have just focused on like maybe a couple more films. And even that, we handed those over to Travis because he was kind of done doing that as well. And we talked about, hey, what's next? What should we do? And the Gymkhana Grid thing was this thing. I was like, I think this would be really fun. And I think it would be, as two people who always talked about how do we make rally bigger in America, the biggest issue is that there's not a good feeder series for rally. One of the reasons is that in rally, your car is a consumable. So so how could you do a feeder series in something that's not as brutal on the car?
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Right. So we were like, could Gymkhana Grid actually be a feeder series into like an ARA? And that's what we started talking about. We started programming it. And as I started to like get this moment to be like, okay, I want to build this, I really started thinking about like the current attention span. And I'm like, okay, our courses need to be 60 seconds long because that's a reel.
Yeah.
And then you literally break the event up into every single match. And then they just go out as reels, and the ones that are good do well and they go to the top, and the ones that are boring fall away. And that's just the math of how that goes. And while I was making that, I was thinking about, and that's just one of the many ideas that we had, but as you start thinking about that, you're like, no current motorsport has that luxury to sit there and say, we're going to build something for the way people consume today. And I think that the way people consume today is like this, like totally polar thing. It's either sub 60 seconds or 2+ hours. Mm-hmm. Like people either want a ton of it or very little. But you need the very little to get them entertained to the other side. And I think that you mentioned this before. This is Formula One's current problem, which is maybe they don't really have that much more viewership, but man, they got a lot more of the people who are consuming 30 seconds to 60 seconds of content on whatever social platform it is. So I say this because, and I'm kind of want to throw this back to you, is like, do you think it's possible to take a current series and steer that ship in a new direction? Or is this something that just starts from scratch? And I may be setting you up to talk about your current project.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much you want to talk about it.
I'm happy to talk about it.
But I think
all of it.
This is really interesting to me because we have now watched these legacy motorsports go through television. They did very well. And to your point, which is something I never thought about before, some of them may have fallen to the wayside because they just didn't do well in a televised format, right? It's motocross versus supercross, right?
Yeah.
Motocross fell away because supercross was easier to film and easier to sell seats, and you have your paint bucket full of Coca-Cola and it was easier to watch, right? But I think we all thought that for the longest time, that like stadium is where we want to be at, and everything moved into the stadium. But stadium does not translate well to television and does not translate well to like good storytelling and all of those, because like if you were to say right now, like pick 3 races you want to tell a story about, Isle of Man, super exciting, Baja or Dakar, interchangeable, right? Or, like Nürburgring 24, which is another race that's like really hard, or Pikes Peak, which is like really hard to tell a story with like 2 cameras,
to
right?
capture,
And part of what makes it great is because it doesn't fit into a cookie cutter type format, right? So I'm gonna slow down talking for a second, but I think like what I'm curious from your point, because you lived in it. I worked in motorsports on the media side, obviously on a management side, from like stuff I did with Ken, but I was never there as a driver. You've been in it way more, and then you've been in it in, I think, sort of a different level than I was. We were always the outsiders. Like when we showed up to WRC, they knew we were the outsiders.
Yeah.
We were problematic. Like I got my media, tablet taken away from me multiple times because they said like I shouldn't have. I have to hire the sanctioned media. I couldn't cover I was in a constant fight with the FIA, and it made me leave just being annoyed because I thought, we're here helping you. Like there's a ton of Americans who didn't even know what World Rally Championship was until we started talking about it. Like, and why are you pushing up against us so much? So in all of my conversations, I feel like, with all the different, motorsports that I've worked with or worked around or been around, and I've had conversations with Indy too. Like Indy has called me and said, hey, what can we do? And the minute you start to tell them, they don't call you back because it's like, that's just too much of a change. That's just not possible, or people aren't going to buy that, right? So like from your perspective, do you think we can right the ship, or do you think it's like no, blow the whole thing up and start from anew? I guess, is that even possible?
Yeah, I think that the ship can be righted. Well, I'd put it this way. I think what people want is for the historical sanctioning bodies like IndyCar, NASCAR, Formula One, WRC, whatever. Just whatever you think fits into this as a listener, like whatever is resonating with you is the thing of choice that like fits into this category.
NHRA, whatever.
I think that people, the best version of motorsports in the future is that those things just sort themselves out and become great because they've got the historical currency, they've got the events, they're like structured to do the thing that they're doing. And what I think a lot of people just want to see is those things be the super rad version of those things that we all know they can be. I'll only mention one other thing on those grounds, just because you mentioned it, you said it earlier, like just kind of applying a different lens to like including all the modern safety and doing all that kind of stuff. Like I'm 100% with you there. It's basically just like we're going to proactively use all of the modern contemporary tools that we've got to design this purposefully to be a certain way so that the cars behave a certain way, so that they sound a certain way, whatever. Like that's the step that nobody's taken. Mm-hmm. I think, again, I think you want to see IndyCar, NASCAR, and F1 just do that. The fans that want these things want that to happen. I don't personally think it's not going to be my move here. Mm-hmm. I'll say this to try to stand something up that, like, if I think there's a better way, I do think there's a better way of doing this. I do think it can exist independent of the existing sanctioning bodies. I am not trying to go toe to toe with all of these, existing entities, nor would I suggest to anybody else, no matter how much funding you have, to do the same thing have a 20 race calendar that you're taking the traveling circus all over the place to do it like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, Robbie Gordon's tried, Tony Stewart's tried.
I think it's like this is where from a sporting property perspective, it gets more into what you're talking about, which is there is an opportunity here to just completely rethink the core structure of what this is, what the business model is, how it works. All of these things are a legacy structure, like in terms of what they are, where they race, how they race, teams, how all of the pieces fit together. They've all been that way. However they are, they're all a little different, but they've all been that way forever, basically, and they've just layered on top. Okay, we got TV, boom, how does that fit in? Okay, now we got social, how does that layer on top? Like they haven't messed with the basic thing. They then all still retain the TV as the primary mechanism for distribution and also for revenue, basically.
Right.
Like that's the main thing. All the other stuff is just meant to try to funnel you towards watching it on TV.
Hey, if the one thing that's preventing you from joining my Patreon is that it costs money, I get it. Everything costs money these days. So I set up an entire section that's free. Some free content, a free chat to talk about this podcast. And look, you might dip your toe in and eventually decide, come in for a swim. Water's warm.
Funnel you towards watching it on TV. And that's how the teams make money.
It's a broken model, but yeah.
So that's what I mean. So I think it would be kind of silly just on the principle of it to choose to just do all of that just because that's what everybody else does. I think the opportunity is to sit here and go, all right, well, what do we think would really be the coolest thing to exist here? And how can we, if we were just going to start from scratch, how could you leverage the fact that actually the media landscape, the technology landscape, the way that people consume stuff has completely changed since 1979.
Yeah.
And what could that look like? And the only thing that I think I would, why maybe you and I would be the right people to jump in on this is I think it's ultra critical that whatever the thing is hyper authentic to, like, I think in terms of what mainstream it still has to fill this void of what mainstream motorsports is missing. Mm-hmm. And that's the Pikes Peak, the Dakar, the Nürburgring 24. The thing about the commonality between all those things is that they're really fucking hard to win at.
Right.
Like, and it's obvious that they're really hard. Like you don't watch any of those things and sit there and wonder whether the winner, it was like a gimme or something.
Right.
You're like, those guys, whatever the hell happened during the race, whether they got a good break at some point or somebody crashed or somebody broke or whatever. However, the winners or the podium finishers ended up there.
Yeah.
As a racer, I'm just like, I don't even need to see what happened. Those guys are badasses, guys or gals or whatever. Yeah. Bathurst, same way. There's these tracks, there's these places, there's these things that they're sort of from the OG world of motorsports, but they've maintained this singularity of, this is just really hard to do. And so the authenticity of the challenge is clear. It's obvious when you see all the 60-second clips. This is a thing that's going on over 2 weeks, but it's also still full of 60-second clips that are just this crazy shit that's going on that if you pay enough attention to it, you can, those are all examples of things that I don't watch on TV because it's like, I don't know, where is it on TV? I don't even have cable anymore or whatever, right? So, but they're accessible because a lot of it's streaming or it's wherever. Mm-hmm. That'll only continue to happen more. And you can basically know what's going on by just paying attention to it on Instagram or whatever every day. So I think it's kind of trying to mash those things together. I also think there's a couple of other pieces here that I think are interesting to start to try to fit into the puzzle, which is like the big events still in motorsports, the centralized events at least, are still the ones that operate like a gathering, like a convening of rad parts and pieces, and that still draws. So there is this in-person element to things that, I feel like we've tried to convince ourselves for a long time that it like doesn't matter or that we shouldn't be indexing on it or something. that it shouldn't be a part of the core business.
Right, because the digital numbers are so big that when you say 100,000 people show up to a race, it seems small.
But it's
the
kind of
reality
like,
is it's a completely different experience.
The big part of the reason that Indianapolis is still a big deal is because 350,000 people pack that place every year, and it creates an energy around the thing that's going on that is completely insane.
And to me,
and that proliferates beyond like just whatever those numbers end up being for the track on an attendance and revenue on that perspective.
And it's I mean, experiential just has so much value in that you talk about like core memories for people. Like I have core memories of being at tracks, even for events that I didn't think were that exciting, like IMSA at Lime Rock.
Yeah.
Like watching the R8s come through some of those sections and you're just like, wow, or like being at, Le Mans in the middle of the night on the Mulsanne and just hearing, like, those are these things that you can't create in television. So they are super valuable. But that's the bottom of the funnel.
For sure.
Because like first you need them to be interested in it before they decide to go there. But I agree
it
shouldn't go away.
As a thing, it's kind of like it creates a sense of like, oh, this must be a thing that kind of matters. It's like any big show, right?
Yeah.
Like, Coachella or those kinds of things. It's like it becomes there's something to like the in-person energy that creates by it being a thing that even when it's on TV or it's, through digital, like that sort of comes through. I guess the other piece of this is, we talked about TV, we've talked about kind of the media model. One of the things that I think is ripe for disruption here in the mainstream sense. So if we're talking about, I think what I want to see is something that exists at the tier of motorsports that is mainstream motorsports, like cars, event, whatever, that are up here. Not something that, to your point, like not something that's in a stadium. Like I want to see the baddest dudes on the planet driving the baddest ass shit at one of the historic, epic venues. Like, I think without that, you're just automatically talking about something that's kind of that has risk of failure due to not being authentic to the challenge enough. Right. There's been a lot of things that are really great that the guys all still show up to. Like there's a lot of data points out there and evidence that like race car drivers are just race car drivers. Like they'll show up to do cool stuff. Even if it like doesn't seem like it should work within their contracts or, whatever, like they just figure out how to do it. Elevate that up to a tier that's like, oh, and now it feels like it really matters. Like there's real stakes here. There's something to prove. This is not like a Mickey Mouse thing that's going on. For me, the big thing to disrupt here is from the moment that these things that TV came into play, like let's say in the 70s, that created this packaging of events within a championship. Like that was the commercial value then immediately became associated with the package of events, not like any one event, whatever. Sure. You had some peaks or whatever, like you still had Monaco, you still had whatever, but the value proposition of being involved in Formula One was your company being associated with this thing that's just that's got massive viewership every other weekend for like this big chunk of time during the year. That's also how the TV rights, like the whole thing works based on that being the deal. I think now, I mean, man, you look at these Jake Paul fights, there's a bunch of other stuff. Fight sports, I think, is like the obvious place to look. Like there's all of this stuff that is just event by event. Maybe they've got one title event per year. Maybe they've got 4 title events per year, whatever. Yeah. But it's built around a more of a standalone, kind of thing, which I just think. Wasn't
this kind of though the inspiration behind the Rufus concept? Because for you, it was your idea, so you should talk through it. But how I remember it was these are really important events. And if you compete in any of these important events, then you get points on the board, right? And it's sort of a collection of those legendary things, right? Yeah. And I mean, so we did tell the audience we were going to talk about Rufus. So just a quick on what it was for you. And do you feel like that's maybe sort of where the direction is going, is that the one-offs, there's a reason that these one-offs exist, right? I mean, whether they exist as part of a series, but like I got to experience, not the full race, but I got to experience getting ready for the race of Bathurst, like being there. Like Bathurst is now on the top of my list.
Sick.
Like I plan to go back to Australia next year just to watch that race, even though I was there for testing and qualifying, but I had to leave. But it's such an amazing track. It's such an amazing location. Like it's so cool. I want to go. I want to go experience that. I don't know if I'd be as interested in going to all the other events, but like there are those ones that stand out. So just quick for the audience. And are you still trying to do Rufus, or is it sort of like is it an idea that you've parked?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Which is basically, so the core concept was, throw a blanket over all of motorsports and just say, what are all of, as independent events, what are the things that actually matter most through the lens of a race car driver, as racers. But the racer and the fan are the most closely connected components of like the,
of course,
value chain in motorsports. I think like they're the ones that have the most aligned incentives for like what they care about and why. So I certainly look at it that way. And much of what I do at this point is just as a fan who has been informed by being a professional racer for like 20 years.
Right.
So it's kind of less the other way around. It's just given me a lot of insight, and like I know all these guys. So the idea basically was back in Parnelli's era, Rufus kind of started out as like a code word, but it just stuck because it was like a good deep cut. That look, those guys did everything, right? And that part of that was it was a pre-television era, so they just made more money by going and doing more different stuff. Like they were, kind of no pun intended, they were like the vehicle. They were the sponsorship platform.
Right.
So if you're Mario Andretti, like it was worth it to sponsor Mario because he was going to get hired to go do all of the biggest events, like sponsoring the entire USAC championship. There wasn't like that was a really diminished value proposition because you're going to go to like 30 events 20 events that basically only a very small regional audience cares about. Whereas Mario was so sponsoring a guy that was just doing the USAC championship, like, okay, you get the Indy 500, you get a couple other big races, but Mario was going to go do Le Mans, he was going to do Sebring, he was going to race in the Daytona 500, like, that was how you got.
This is how we structured Ken's plan.
Publicity
was like, hey, Ken's going to race these rounds in this, but he's also going to do these other 5 things. And we always used to call it the calendar release, which was like, this is all the stuff we're doing this year, and it's going to go across all these things. And it worked. Yeah.
And so the thesis for all of this was basically that not only that connect, just from a perspective of like, I want to see motorsports be better for race car drivers and fans. That was the pure motivation for doing this. Motorsport was more connected. There was more connective tissue across all of motorsport because this is how it worked. And that from a driver's perspective, you ended up with these guys who, by proving it, are all-time greats that nobody has held a candle to in that way since then. Mario, AJ Foyt, Dan Gurney, Jim Clark, Jackie Stewart, Parnelli,
the legends.
They're guys that that every race car driver now, when you throw out those guys' name, they're like royalty in a way that even Senna, Schumacher, Earnhardt, Petty, like, they're sort of in different categories,
And they were multi-talented because they would race Baja one weekend, they would race Pikes,
and they showed up and just kicked ass at everything.
And would also show up to like a random SCCA race.
Yeah, they'd show up and be like, I'm just gonna do this dirt car race this weekend, and whatever. They were racers. They were pure racers, and the business like worked by them being pure
I wonder
racers.
if that's like, I've never thought about this before, but I wonder if that's part of the model problem. Is that instead, right now, the series controls everything.
Yeah, so you have TV, everything gets packaged, the driver becomes a part of that value chain. They get locked into, no, the value proposition to being associated with this driver is he's an F1 guy.
Right.
We need him, and now this whole thing is a huge business. So we're, back in the 60s, 70s, guys are making a lot of money. Yeah, it's business, but it's like loose, it's free and loose.
Right.
Like anything.
It's not
like
generational wealth level business.
This is now like, no, we got real commercial partners. Like we got to take, we're locking down, how we're going to do this. We got to gain more control over these assets. And the driver's just at that point kind of an asset. Like the drivers lost their power of influence through that period. The thesis for Rufus was all of this great stuff is still out there in motorsports. Although one of the big pushbacks that I got at the beginning of this whole thing from people who were not like inside motorsports was, but there's no evidence that racers are still that way because they're not out there really doing this. You got your Tony Stewarts or, you know, whatever, but it's few and far between in comparison to what it was like back then. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, these guys are race car drivers, like, you know, and that was, it was a good reflection for me to like get, I was just, at first, I was just like, who are you? Like, you don't know, you clearly just don't know anything about this. And you have a lot of people start to be like, well, you know, they're not going to be able to get out of their thing. They're not going to be able to do this and that, you know, kind of throwing cold water on the idea that this could even be possible, that guys would even want to think about motorsports that way, let alone that they have any interest in doing anything outside of their swim lane, let alone that they could do it, you know, whatever. So that was and I had some partners at the time that were like, yeah, we'll underwrite seeing where this goes. So I just launched it as like a secret society, basically in 2019, at the beginning of 2019. We had these sick welcome kits that were, we came up with a criteria, we came up with a point system, you know, we could go into this whole thing, what the calendar is, how you accumulate points, you know, blah, blah, blah.
But in the end, there was an incentive for drivers to step outside of
it was, and it was pretty on the nose that it was basically like, we had this sick video. Parnelli actually helped us with the whole thing. He wanted to see the whole thing, you know, kind of go down, as did a bunch of the other guys from kind of back in the day, that it was basically like, hey, look, like, if you don't do this, then nobody will ever know if you could have or not. You know, like, and that a lot of this was also a lot of the, you know, reasoning behind the way that it worked and the way that we went about it was these two other components of the thing that we, you know, thought had occurred, which is motorsports, even at least during Senna's F1 era, like, you could reasonably say, you'd sit there and just watch him drive an F1 car and you'd kind of go, I bet he'd get anything and haul ass in it. Yeah. You know, because it was so over the top the way that, you know, this, you know, I keep coming back to it, but this human expression element, it was so evident that he was just unquestionably great, you know, like there was no hiding it. That has changed now. So you've got all these guys at the top of the sport and it's kind of like, well, maybe they're great, but maybe it's the car. Like, who knows? Yeah. You know, I mean, I sit there and watch a Formula One qualifying lap and I'm kind of like, I don't know.
I mean, one of the debates that I see a lot,
like, we shouldn't have to like watch the sector times to figure out who's doing a good job, but that's just kind of how it is.
One of the debates I think that comes up a lot now is, are the modern day F1 drivers better than the 80s, 60s, whatever, pick an era driver, because they're going faster? Or is there an argument that there was so much more to do as a driver mechanically in the car? You know, like, where does that live? That they've become these robots, and it's like, it's really amazing when you look at how fast they are, how close they are in times. Like, it's tenths, it's hundredths of a second. Like, it's gotten so close. But, you know, if you were to stick them into, you know, a car from the 70s or the 80s, like, would they perform the same, right? And I don't know. You may have a better thought on that, and I'm sure it's a conversation that drivers talk about more.
I think if you were watching F1, you would think the answer. I think you would be led into thinking that the answer to that is no, because it's become such a sterilized experience that you're like, well, they're not actually doing, there's nothing about this that is analog, you know, in terms of the experience. My reaction to that would be, I am certain that the best guys today are as good as the best guys from yesteryear. We just can't fucking tell. And that's the problem. We're just not platforming. And so we have that, which is, I think, a problem that deserves to be solved. Basically, the mechanism for solving that via Rufus was incentivizing them to just get out of their swim lane and go do something else, you know, and that functions to be able to showcase that, yes, you could get in something else and go crush at it or enjoy the experience or whatever. I'll kind of get to guys actually starting to do that. And it turned out that there was all kinds of different reasons why they were doing it and why they enjoyed it, you know, and whatever. But The other piece of it is, you mentioned it with Ken's coming out with the calendar release, that we came from this period in time pre-TV where what the driver was doing like had a lot to do with creating value. We got locked into this TV only mechanism for value creation within the sport. And that was like, well, what team are you on? Are they going to be fast? What's their commercial deal? And you're just a part of that operation. Our hunch, I mean, this was 5 or 6 years, more than that, 7, 8 years ago now. But like the hunch that I had was, I think that has all flipped basically to the Ken model, like you guys, sort of did. That the drivers actually have an incredible power of influence now, that in motorsport, you see it in every other sport, but in motorsports, it's kind of been a little bit untapped.
Yeah.
And that by driver X going and competing across different championships, that's like good for everybody. Like that's floating all the boats a little higher because they're bringing their now built-in owned audience on social and whatever. That's cross-pollinating with some other championship that they wouldn't normally be existing in. It's bringing, Chase Elliott comes and does, sports car race. It's kind of, doing this whole thing. That's completely independent of TV. It's this whole other layer of thing that's going on. So my point of view on this, and a bunch, I had a little team that shared this point of view, was like, this for sure makes motorsports better. It's just, what are the mechanisms in place to actually make it happen? And basically I didn't know, like when it was kind of like, I think this is a good idea. I think guys will do it just because they're bored. And like, and that there's realness to it. There's a truth. There's a very basic truth to the idea that if you don't do this, then just nobody will ever know. Like I sort of said. And I'll never forget, we made these sick welcome kits that had a little video, all of this stuff, this like dope little Parnelli Jones helmet, gold pin, all these things. We kind of, came up with criteria for who was going to get one of these things. We basically just isolated IndyCar, NASCAR, F1 guys, because although there are unquestionably guys outside of those 3 championships that ought to be included in something like this, to start with, it's like these are the guys that are most in the crosshairs of the problematic area of this thing that already have the highest profile. So if we can kind of get these guys to start to operate in a little bit of a different way, then it more easily trickles down elsewhere. I obviously knew all the IndyCar guys. So in one weekend, it was Sebring, Fontana, and Australian Grand Prix in 2019, that there was a group of guys that took these welcome kits to Australia that were there. I went to the Fontana NASCAR race and then flew to Sebring that night, and like a bunch of the IndyCar guys were there because it was an IndyCar off weekend. Delivered these kits to all these guys. That was just a rundown of what this thing is. And I knew a bunch of them, but chose not to brief anybody on like this going down, because I wanted an authentic reaction. Yeah. Like, maybe this is stupid and these guys will all be like, yeah, but I don't have time for this. Or yeah, if there's $5 million, I'll do it. Or, whatever. And I will never forget walking into Kyle Busch's hauler. I don't know Kyle at all. I've never met him before, whatever. And this is peak Kyle Busch. Yeah. Like, I mean, this was in his absolute, not to say he's not still a championship caliber guy, but this is like championship Joe Gibbs, M&M's Kyle Busch.
Also very unfiltered.
Yeah. Walked in, he opens this thing, throws headphones on, watches the video, and he was not the only guy that this happened with, but you're like watching his kind of jaw clench a little while he's like watching the video, and takes the headphones off. And we had this vellum sheet that was all of the guys' names that we were sending these things to with their name highlighted. Kyle's was like next to Lewis, and he was just like, okay, so how do I do this? Like, what do I do? And was super serious. It's not to say it's the only reason, but he did the 24 Hours of Daytona the following year and like cited, that was the beginning of 2020. So 2020 pandemic occurring is a big part of the reason why this didn't continue. Yeah. But, he cited, Like he got asked by Marshall Pruitt, like, so what are you doing here? And he was like, you know about this thing called Rufus? And so over that year in 2019, and we didn't even let any of these guys know that this was like, we delivered this stuff totally unannounced in March of 2019. By the end of that year, the IndyCar guys had kind of the most flexibility. So like a bunch of those guys had already messed with their schedule that season. Like in season had messed with their schedule to try to accumulate enough races to kind of meet the criteria. Fernando Alonso was in his, mode where he was in between. So that was the year that he did, it wasn't because of Rufus, but because he already had these things on his agenda. But that year he did Dakar, raced Le Mans, won Le Mans, won Sebring, competed at Indy, did all that kind of stuff. He was a huge, like he and I became boys that year because he was just like, we fired up an Instagram account basically just the day before. I was like, shit, I don't know a bunch of these guys. They're not going to know that we're coming. The stuff was all like fluoro yellow. So we started just like tagging all of these guys in a bunch of posts just so that they would kind of
be like, oh, I think I saw that.
So if this guy is like walking towards me with a bag and this stuff, like you don't just like run the other direction, And so Fernando, a couple of the guys, but Fernando like immediately just took a screenshot or, took a photo and posted it and kind of like blurred stuff out and like made it real. Like,
I remember that.
Questionable. And, within the first week of the Instagram, I, like shut it down since then, but the first week of the Instagram handle existing, it had like 200,000 profile views or whatever, just instantly.
Yeah.
So it was the thing that I'll kind of fast forward, which is one of the things that 2020 happening the way that it did, I couldn't travel. I couldn't like keep up with all this stuff. Some of the backing that had sort of been promised like fizzled because things were just haywire at that point. And I looked at that kind of 2019 year as like a prototype of just there's a bunch of things that until we start to just do this, like we're not going to be able to answer some of these questions about how does this actually work? What incentives really need to be in place? And one of my takeaways for sure from all of that was it's a fun idea to think about treating something like this as a media business. But that still leaves there being there, and so this needs an event. Like this needs this needs a place where all of this converges in one place. And that has to be fucking incredible. And there's room for that. Like that ought to be a thing and it can be a thing.
Yeah.
So that's definitely on that side of things. I've got this other project, which is
so let's talk about that.
Build the car that ought to be the thing,
right? Because and that's
that maybe is like the final boss of this.
No, and I think these are all the pieces, right? Like for me, it's about how do we tell a story that captivates people, makes them want to follow this in the way that I think people follow stick and ball sports.
Yeah.
Right. Where, imagine, I know it exists on levels, but it's like, you look at things like fantasy football. It's like people love this so much that they want to participate in this like weird fantasy
gamified
way.
Yeah.
And I did a year of fantasy football just because a bunch of my friends were doing it. And it's like, and it made me realize like there are so many facets of football. Like there's just so much that you can enjoy. You can enjoy it simply, or you can be like all in and know every running stat and like all these things. And I'm not a stick and ball person, but I do enjoy. I enjoy football as a sport because I like the strategy of the coach side and everything of it, and I like the brutality of it. But for me, I would look at things like that and say, like, I wish there was that same love for motorsports, where motorsports isn't giving the pieces out there. So it's like, I think you have to have the story there. That's good, and then I think you just have to have something exciting and fun to watch, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about, like, for me, the Gymkhana films, it's all about like, is it fun to watch? Like that's the simplest thing, right? And and do that. And then I think it needs to be, I think it also needs to be something that obviously is competitive, but has to have style part to it. And I was going to bring this up before, but we jumped ahead on the Gymkhana thing. Is really interesting to me because we did it for years with Ken, and it wasn't until I went and did it with Travis that I realized that it was so different with Travis.
Yeah, these two guys are like
they're so different,
completely different,
and they brought
element to
something
this
so
thing.
different to it. And it was a completely different experience. And someone actually asked me while I was making the last film, they said, is this difficult for you to make this film with Travis? Like, does it remind you a lot of Ken? And I'm like, oddly, no, because Travis's approach to this is so different. Like, there's moments on set with the crew that reminded me of it, but working with Travis doesn't, because it's so different. And then I thought, that's one of the things that's so like kind of sweet about the Gymkhana project is like you could like Travis's films don't feel like a ripoff of Ken's films. There's something completely different. And I think to your point, it sort of lets that human element of the driver sort of come through. He drives differently. He likes different stuff. Travis likes big, scary, fast jumps. Like that's what he's into. Ken like nuance. Yeah. Travis couldn't spell nuance. Like Travis is like a wrecking ball through a wall type of experience. He's a sledgehammer. Yeah. And Ken is like a TIG weld. It's like slow and methodic, right? And these and it was really fun to do that. But I think that creating a motorsport where I use Gymkhana as an example because it's something I know well, but I think creating a motorsport where those characteristics can come out in a driver, where you can see that. And even my knock on Sebastian Loeb earlier, it is great though, because that sport still allowed different driving styles, where I think a lot of things, the cars become so regulated that there is only one way to drive them.
That's 100% true.
And then only one type of driver is rewarded. And from what I've experienced, it tends to be the more conservative driver. And I hate to say this, but conservative driving doesn't create Michael Jordans of the sport.
No.
Right. And that, so to me, those are those pieces. But what I think is really interesting from your side, and I'm setting you up for the vehicle side, is that I have my opinions on what drivers need, vehicles, and all of this. But this is my expertise. For you, the expertise is what the drivers need and what the vehicle needs to be to get what I need to create here out of it. So without further ado, tell us about the project that you're working on right now, which is your current moment.
Yeah. Blackbird 66, I basically just sort of in essence, kind of a studio that I formed just to do this kind of stuff, like a place where these kinds of things can live. And, the first sort of project that I worked on, through that was the Mark I. So it's an open wheel concept that is all these things. I mean, I didn't think about it exactly like this doing it, but I think everything over the last 10 or 15 years has made it so that it's this way. It's sort of my frustration with the fact that motorsport didn't take anything from Gymkhana and trying to sort of translate what to me resonated so instantly about it to mash together with a lifetime of going to vintage races and seeing what cars from the 60s and 70s driven in anger are like. Seeing Can-Am, and I've driven a bunch of that stuff at this point. Like I've driven 70s F1 cars that are 10 seconds a lap slower than a contemporary race car. Are they more fun? Oh my God, man. Like it's just and so talking about from the experience of a driver, like kind of talked about like that flow state thing, you just lock in instantly. Like you don't have to think about it. There's no like build up to it. It's just the thing is meant to drive on the outside rear like a sprint car, and it's fast that way. Like you couldn't drive it any other way and get it to go fast. The more you're willing to set it up to just be driven that way, the faster it goes, because it's on like fucking drag slicks, and like little tiny front tires. And H pattern, and they weigh. I mean, I say it's 10 seconds off. I did a test day at Sears Point. This was 10 years ago or so. I mean, I don't even know if I was racing IndyCar at that time. Was shaking a car down for somebody, but it was after a big race weekend. 1975 Penske PC3, so flat bottom car, big wedge nose, Formula 5000 style scoop DFV. I mean, weighs like 1,000 pounds soaking wet. Naturally aspirated DFE. We were on decent rubber after a big race had gone on, so the track was rubbered down, and we were like 3 seconds off the track record in that car, because it's just
probably looked way more
exciting, and you're doing it in the most badass way possible. You're going through turn 10 at Sears Point, which is arguably like a super high commitment corner with just like not thinking it's. There's risk and there's stakes when it's like that, but it's not like, it's not like just the moment you start to lose traction that you're like, oh shit, you know, like, because that's how a modern race car is like, you're exactly to your point earlier, like the fastest way to one way to go fast, to be at the very limit, you got to be able to be right at the limit, you know. So to stick the thing on pole, you got to kind of be willing to throw caution to the wind.
Yep.
But you can be really fast by being just a little under the limit everywhere, because that's kind of how the cars are designed to work. Like the consequences, even not in terms of crashing, but just in terms of losing speed from going over the limit, are significant doing anything. So this Mark I concept is kind of taking all of that, taking frustration with modern motorsports and just saying, hey, look, like there's a different way to do this, which is take the fucking wings off. Like, get rid of the downforce in a big way. And we can crank all the knobs back up to make up for that, in so much as it matters. Like, I don't even really care.
Yeah.
But we can create an experience both for driver and fan at the performance level, we'll just say generally, of top tier motorsports that is radically different. And there are a lot of questions about that in the context of an existing series, like in an IndyCar or an F1 or whatever, that I don't know the answer to. Like, how do those cars do this or that? What do they actually look like? How do they actually work at certain tracks? You know, whatever. There's all these things, but I pushed this out into the world because, as far as I'm concerned, like, and this is a little bit of speaking on behalf of everybody. Like, this is a conversation that happens within every part of the motorsport industry. You go into any paddock and you gain, you know, if you have the trust of whoever you're talking to, like, they're going to be straight with you. NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, I'm sure the WRC guys have the same conversation. Like, why do the cars have so much downforce? Like, why? And the question that follows that up is because they all have a lot of downforce and the wick has been turned way down. So it's like, why are we still doing this?
Right.
And the question that ends up being left unanswered is, well, what would happen if you changed it? Like, what really is the outcome of doing it the way that we all, from Mario to Rick Mears to Gordon Murray and Adrian Newey, like, it's such a funny thing. We talked a lot about this project was inspired by a conversation with Dan Gurney before he passed away, that the main thing that I'll mention about it was that he even said, he was like, I had to become removed from the 24/7 365 just trying to beat the other guys.
Right.
I had to be like 10 years removed from that to even. This is kind of like, you know, the conversation, what you mentioned about the NASCAR execs and stuff like that.
When you're in it, it's hard to think about anything but what I need to do tomorrow. You're
just like, well, this is just how it is. And now we got to figure out the immediate next thing after. You're just putting out fires right, left, and center, right?
As in anything.
And
being 3 years removed to Hoonigan, I'm like, man, I would have done so much of that different. But when you're in it, you're just in it, and you just got to live through tomorrow.
Yeah. And so this is my version of, let's find out. We've been talking about this for long enough. We've been like, this conversation has been a conversation for my entire IndyCar career. Like, from the very beginning, from the moment I set foot in IndyCar, there's been people wondering, like, why not just crank the engines and take the downforce away, or just take the downforce away?
Yeah.
Like, to our points, like, wouldn't that all by itself just create for a more naturally engaging thing going on here? And so
is the Mark I something that'll make it to a prototype phase, or is it sort of a engineering sort of paper experiment?
So I basically just finished scoping, building an actual, you know, proof of concept, basically, of the idea behind it. So the idea behind it is very simply create a hyper analog driving experience that is built around a, you know, significantly reduced downforce open wheel car that makes 1,000+ horsepower on big fucking meats. Like,
I like that.
Get big tires on the thing.
Turbo?
It'll end up being turbocharged. So the buck that we're going to use is the 2007, the last champ car.
Okay.
So 2007 Panos DP01. This was among the, still to this day is faster than a current Indy car. It was the last year that Champ Car existed, so it's a little bit of a stillborn vehicle, but it was built in the United States. It was made to make a point. I've gone and looked at the chassis since. You're kind of sitting there like, oh man, it's like 2007. That's almost 20 years old. But you go look at it and you're like, just the craftsmanship, the build quality of this thing was today's spec. It has a little bit less of some of it doesn't have the windscreens, it doesn't have halos, it doesn't have some of those things. But, again, like nothing really has changed you look at a Formula One chassis from 20 years ago and kind of like the same as a Formula One chassis. They're different sizes and stuff now.
Changes,
and Indy cars have stayed, it's literally been the same chassis for 12 years. So in some respects, like not that much has really changed. So it's a good starting point in terms of it's a lightweight thing. I mean, I'll kind of cut to the chase here, which is we're going to end up developing a bespoke motor for this. We've already got that, locked in and dialed, because if you want to make 850 horsepower, there's a lot of stressed engines that can do that. If you want to make 1,000 plus, there's just not. There's a lot of engines that
do you know what kind of archetype you'd
for
go
a
for
day that? And become a grenade.
Can you talk like is like V8, V10, V12? Like what do you guys?
It's not going to be as sexy, I don't think, as that type of thing. Just out of because I think the end game here is end up with something that sounds fucking incredible and is all the things. My aim initially is prove out that this just as a way of doing things can make sense. So I think this is actually going to be more in, for IndyCar fans, this is going to be a little bit more in like, rekindling a little bit of like Offenhauser vibes from the 70s, turbo 4-cylinder, but going to be like an absolute.
As an old hot rod guy, I love offy stuff.
Fire breathing.
Yeah.
Like this is going to have some, switching to nitro vibes.
And that's what we need. That's what we all grew up on. We all grew up on hitting.
To start with, it's not going to be like, 15,000 horsepower or 15,000 RPM. But it's going to be, it's going to make, I think on like a single day basis, it'll make 1,200 horsepower. Like
and if it sounds good doing it,
it's going to be
fire.
It's going to be
like those
it's going to be rowdy as shit, like one way or the other. I think we'll end up, some of the suppliers and stuff, like I'm not going to talk about yet because we don't have it like completely locked in. But I think the end game here is there's a couple of, in order to move further in this direction, there's a couple of questions that need to get answered. But the primary one being if you have the ability to increase power, if you have the ability to increase mechanical grip with a bespoke tire, if you can make the car lighter weight compared to like the existing stuff, how much downforce can you take off before the whole thing just falls off a cliff? Like I'm not trying to develop a car that is not fun to drive, that is not still fast, those things. So there's no data point for any of that. We've screwed around with, I've got, lead engineers, technical directors at current IndyCar teams, like out the back door, like helping me do all the data analysis for all this stuff, running simulations, all these kinds of things. But at a point, there is no current model for something that is trustworthy once you get outside of like a 10 or 5 or 10% variance from some current thing. So we're just going to go do this out in the open. Like I think the story here is we're going to go find out what the answer to a bunch of these questions are towards developing a vehicle that feels and behaves, whether as a prototype it exactly looks the part, may or may not, like, because you're just going to be stuck with, this is kind of the size and shape of an existing thing, so that we can go figure some of this stuff out as a development buck. But we're going to go find out what the ultimate racer's race car is and what that should be like in a totally contemporary sense. Like, I think this is the thing that race car drivers, that fans, that people across the motorsport industry are, within the context of their own thing, wondering what this version of their thing, is like. And it's just like, it's time to find out, it's time to start actually doing something here, to figure this stuff out.
Well, if you need someone to help tell that story, I know a guy. He happens to be sitting at this table. But
I mean, the badass thing about it is that there's a version of this car just as a prototype, not as a bespoke thing, that is compared to a current Indy car, 30% lighter, 30% more mechanical advantage, 30% more power, and at that point, like if you just added all those things up and kept the wings on it, you have the fastest race car to ever exist, basically. So it's a lot of grounds to, like, there. I think we'll have a lot of margin to peel the layers back, take a lot of downforce off the car to really try to home in on what is the core experience that we should be after here, without and being able to showcase that this is possible to do without sacrificing base performance, and it's possible to do in a much with, if you take all the constraints of the sanctioning bodies and the rules and all of that stuff away, that, we're going to do this with an engine that's designed and built in a Michigan garage, like that it's possible to do this with homegrown partners, that the technology and resources required to do a lot of the things at a performance level of mainstream motorsports have been democratized at this point. So I'm excited I'm excited to get with it, to start actually seeing something happen. Because I at this point, I just think that's the missing piece until you prove that it can be done. If I'm IndyCar, like, I get it. Like, this is a big risk or anybody. Yeah. Well, if you don't think you have a problem, then you're not going to fix it. So,
and to rewind back, I said, when I asked, like, do you think that you have to start something new, or do you have to, like, or can these original OG sanctioning bodies and series, write the course? I think there's actually, the answer's in the middle. And I think the middle is you have to build proof of concepts that they see as successful, because these are billion-dollar industries that they're not going to change the direction of unless they know that it could work. Yeah. Right. And I think that that's the thing. And I think, to your point earlier, which was like, why did they look at Gymkhana and not, figure out how to make that work? I think it's because they didn't have the understanding of what parts of Gymkhana could be carried over to what they did. Yeah. Right. And they looked at Gymkhana.
I agree with that.
And they knew that it was something cool. They knew that it made them excited. It made an audience excited, but they didn't understand what parts of that recipe could be sprinkled on what they had to make it work. They didn't know why it worked. And to be honest, if they knew why it did, they would have already done it, which I think was part of the issue, because it was like a new media, it was something different. But I think that where I look at this, and I've spent a lot of time, like, post Hoonigan, thinking, like, what do I want to do next in life, right? Yeah. I want to make movies. That's a big part of it. I enjoy podcasting because this is just an enjoyable thing for me. I just enjoy the conversation. If it can be a business, that's great, but I just like the format. But the other big part of it for me is the, like, save motorsports thing. And I know when I say that, that's like this, like, really, it sounds big and bold. Oh, go. Not that I expect that I can save motorsports, but I think I have some ideas that can help other people who have ideas like you to kind of come all together. And I realize that I don't think we're there to build a new series. I think that's a lot of the mistakes that other people have taken, right? Yeah. Who've said, I'm going to go do my own thing because they didn't want to work within the confines. And I understand that, because the corporateness of the current system is very difficult. But I think if you could go build one thing and have it be very successful as a standoff, you'll have other people go, okay, how do we make our sport more like that? How can we bring you guys in to help us do this? Or, hey, it could even be something as simple as, like, that's a great thing. We'd like to own that and license that from you and go do something else with it that maybe lives as a sub-series to their series as they continue to test it and say, hey, does this work, right? And, does this live well as our Friday event? And that's what, when I was talking to NASCAR, their whole thing was like, hey, we went from being a Sunday event to a Saturday Sunday event to a Friday Saturday Sunday event, and now it's like they're talking about, like, Wednesday through, and they're looking for these other sports that don't have to be NASCAR, right, that could live in a space, and this was years ago, that could live in a space that maybe if it does well on a Wednesday, it could eventually become a Saturday event. Like, they were not beholden to the core sport of oval racing NASCAR. They were like, if it does well and the audience wants to watch it, they're going to lean into it, which is why look how many road races there are now in NASCAR, because they're realizing a younger audience is watching NASCAR if they do road racing.
Yeah.
They're not watching on the oval because that's just a different audience for whatever reason, right? And it's interesting. My dad doesn't like the road races. He likes the oval stuff for whatever reason that is. But me, I'll tune in to watch the road racing stuff because it's more, to me, it's like the closer they can get to like Australian supercar, the more I'm gonna watch it. Like if they just tomorrow
take this thing on the road, go to Mountain Panorama.
If tomorrow,
I'm all in.
I'm all in. Like if tomorrow, like they were like, hey, it's just gonna be American supercar, I'd be like, yeah, I'll watch it. I'm like, I'm number one fan. So, but no, and I think like these pieces all have to come together to make it. But maybe that's the goal. Maybe the goal is like go do a one single stand-up event at a place that matters, because I think that's a really important thing that you brought up. And I'm trying to put all of our pieces here right now. Tell a great story, bring it to a place that matters, because you can't go race. And I don't want to name a nothing track because I don't want to insult them. But there's a lot of nothing tracks that we all know about.
Yeah,
you go do something there, it doesn't matter. But you go do something at a Laguna, you go do something at, obviously any of the famous international, tracks, a Bathurst, right?
Yeah.
Like
Spa,
it's Spa. Yeah. It matters, right? Even Road America, like there's certain, I'll throw one out there that I think is a fantastic track that we don't talk about. Watkins.
I figured you were going to say that.
Like
I was waiting for that to come up.
Yeah, because I think Watkins has such great history.
It's
the bog,
and it's so sick.
Do you know the parties at Watkins were like Woodstock level?
Because that's like inside turns 1, 2, 3. Or
yeah, I think it was
or whatever. It's not turn 1, but
everybody just partied. No one even watched the race. Everyone just got drunk and had like a wild time. There's so much cool history at Watkins. Like that's a great place.
Sofas getting lit on fire.
Yeah, which is like a little Sebring vibes too. Sebring's definitely that, just on concrete and in Florida humidity. But yeah, but no, I think that like those are those pieces. Like we build this thing. This is what we should do. We should leave here. We should figure out a plan to go. You've got the car. You've got the driver's experience, and I also think you have the ability to talk to other drivers, to bring them in, because when they hear me talk, they're like, "Oh, this guy just wants me to
I could get some guys on board with this.
This guy just wants me to jump a canyon or some crazy shit. I ain't Travis Pastrana.
Stay away from fire."
Yeah. Everyone just expects me to want them to do that, but I actually, we made Gymkhana because we wanted people to watch rally racing.
Yeah.
Right. Like for us, it was the top of the funnel to get people to watch more rally, and I think that's how we used that. But to me, I think there's an interesting thing on all motorsports, which is like, go build these one things and get people to go, I want to see more of that.
I think, and I'll only just say that I'm certainly not afraid of the challenge to just go do it. Like, I think there's actually so much less red tape than there's ever been to just go do shit.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I'm happy to be wrong about all of this, but none of us learn anything by just doing the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah. So it's like, it's time to
we've been doing the same thing over and over again in motorsports for 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting.
Like, it's time.
Well, the number one things I'm going to take away from this conversation that I think are really interesting is like, how do we put the driver in a position to perform in a way that you care about the human interest of that driver? And it is completely like obvious to the viewer, right? That one I think is super important. Two, I do think that the series and what you refer to as the package is a huge issue with motorsports, because like it has to be 13 weekends of television or 50 weekends of television, depending on what you race in. And that becomes this thing that's not like, they're not all great. But
it's big and heavy, but
like one-off events like Pikes and some of these other things are really interesting. And a one-off event could be a great way to introduce something new. The vehicle side of it, I think we both very much agree there that technology has pushed the vehicle to a place that maybe just doesn't suit entertainment purposes anymore, and also doesn't seem to suit the driver. No one seems to be having as much fun in the way that it was. I think the storytelling side of it, like all of those pieces, like that component, like how do you tell this in a way that not only is consumable in a 2.5, 3 hour format, but is also really digestible in 30 seconds that makes you go, I want to see more of that. And eventually we get you to the 2.5 hour consumption. If that ever matters, or if you always want to live in the short side, that works as well. And I think the other one is like, how do you create all of that? And this is the part that, both of us aren't talking about. And this is probably the third person at the table that we need. How do you monetize it? Because unfortunately, motorsports is expensive. I always wanted to make a shirt, like the motorsports is dangerous, like thing that you see, like it's really big in Europe. Every sign it says like motorsports is dangerous, and then it lists all the ways you could die. I just wanted to make a shirt that just said motorsports is expensive.
And all the ways you could
and all the ways you could lose money in motorsports, because it's the part, because you and I can both sit here and have these amazing conversations of we're gonna fix motorsports, and it's like, we just need $200 million to do a prototype event. And that's the reality that people don't want to talk about. Okay, I'm going to hit you with one last question. You talked about you're not afraid of the danger. That's just a perfect segue into, I had a podcast I did with Rob Dahm. Dahm bought an old Indy car. I think you heard it. You texted me about it. Would you do that? Because Rob lives in a fantasy world. Like, that's what makes Rob great. Rob lives in a world where like it's just his crazy brain, the neurodivergence that puts together his rotary engines. But would you hop in a car that one is that old, like, and all of that, and go to try? And do you think it's actually possible in what he said to go set a record at Laguna?
Well, I don't want to pick his part too much without Rob being here, to be honest with you. But like, and so Rob, I would say first, like 100%. Call me, like we'll put us in touch if you want to. I mean, I'm happy to engage with this whole thing.
I'll connect you guys after.
I think that there is for sure just like a baseline safety component to the thing, because I mean, I drive all kinds of vintage stuff and whatever, but I like sort of.
But you're not trying to set a lap record.
You're not trying to set a lap record. I mean, sometimes I am.
That's what I like about you.
But that I've actually learned, like, don't, like, just because it's going to be clubbing baby seals, like, don't relax. Like, you gotta actually, you're there. I'm there to be a professional race car driver.
Right.
I've certainly gotten much more joy out of it treating it that way. So the first thing is, you're talking about a Laguna is no joke, for one, and you're talking about a car that's you're gonna be going like 180 miles an hour in this thing to be able to achieve that kind of performance with to even get in the window of that kind of lap time with that car. It's gonna haul ass, like, it's
downhill braking into turn one
really fast,
moving.
Going up the corkscrew at like 170 probably, right? Because this thing is on the spectrum towards like what I'm talking about compared to modern cars. Like, you're gonna achieve performance with that car, Lola kart car, I think, right? Like, it's a Lola.
Yeah, Lola.
Yeah. 1997, those cars were fast as shit. Like 97, I think I looked this up because I was there in 1997 watching that race. That's Brian Herta was on pole. 107.8 was the lap time. The official track record is like a current Indy car there, which is like 106 and some change after the repave. The unofficial lap times, which is I think what Rob has kind of pointed at, are, there was originally a Toyota F1 car in demonstration that went 106 like 2 or 3. Sebastian Bourdais in the Panos Champ car that I've been talking about, so using that car as the base, went 105.8. And then the Ferrari F2003, I mean, peak kind of F1 pace, 105.7. So that's the neighborhood that you got to get into. So that's all to say, to even just get under like a minute 10 or something, there's very few cars that occupy that space, and you're going to be moving. And I guess I think the only concern that I would have for anybody in that kind of situation is to go run laps at like 90% or even 95% in a car like that. There's like safety things that you have to be aware of and pay attention to doing that. You're still gonna be going 180, but like not at the absolute limit. To go break a track record, you're gonna have to be on the absolute limit, like 100% of the limit, and willing to go over it at every part of the track. So that's cars going to be pulling 4Gs under braking and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's just a level of preparedness required to go do that. I mean, you're talking about a car that in order to run
30 years old.
Yeah. And that even in period, in order to run those lap times, is backed by the infrastructure of Ford Cosworth, of Bridgestone Firestone, of, a 100-person, a 50-person race team all of that stuff. So I guess that kind of trickles down even to the performance side a little bit is, this is not a thing that you're just going to show up and go do.
Right.
However, I'll say why this is plausible for the sake of putting some skin in the game here. He's got the motors. The motors are the hardest part.
He's got like 20 of them.
Yeah. He might need all 20 of them, just because like I know from working around, so he's got the XD, which is the kart motor from that time. The Panos Champ car that I'm talking about is the XFE, like an iteration of those motors. They're just hard to get them running right, for like real periods of time. You can't really get them on. They're hard to get on dynos. Like they run on methanol. It's like it's a whole thing. So it's a little bit of like running the car ends up being the dyno, like hopefully this one's good, send it out and see what happens. Tire is a huge piece of where performance is going to come from or not. And there's not something that's like off the shelf. Like there are off the shelf tires that are really good for cars like that, but not to hit a performance target.
Okay.
So there's definitely some stuff that's like, but I guess the point, the reason that it's plausible though is the track was probably slower than it is now back when that car ran. In its peak form, it was not that far off of the current track record. There is room to make it faster than it was. I honestly, I don't think there's a lot of room on the engine side. Like there's probably room to turn those things up, but that was like a competition era that was Ford Cosworth versus Honda versus Toyota versus Mercedes-Benz. Like it's not like they were pulling punches, at that time, but get the right tire on it, get a lot of grip out of the tire.
Tire partner to come in. Where a tire partner wanted to come prove something that was willing to dump money in, because I think
you could do aero development on the car, like but you're getting into like this thing's going to be generating like real loads and like it's a development program basically to actually go do it. So but you're in. But it's badass, and like I'm happy to, like if it's the type of, like all of these things always for me are like if you're going to take it seriously, and which I'm sure Rob will to a degree. At a point, it's like how much resource do you have, and how much time are you willing to invest to actually go do that? I think there's a different version of the whole thing. Just listening to it, like the car is totally badass. Like Rob, like you go drive it and like get down to a ultra quick. Rob in that car could be one of like the, inside of like the 20 fastest people at Laguna ever. That's badass too. So anyway.
All right, sir. Well, dude, I appreciate you coming through. We could probably talk about this for like another 6 hours, but I think now we have to...
We'll pull some pen and paper out.
Yeah, I was going to say, now we have to pen and paper this and actually build a strategy. Hopefully there's one person who's listening to this who's like, we should invite those guys in for a meeting. That never goes anywhere. But, we've both been in those meetings. But no, I want to say Motorsports, and there's probably a lot of people... They might not have listened this far, who are like just normal car people who like aren't motorsports people.
Yeah.
But for me, I think all of the best things in cars are inspired from motorsports. So even if you don't love motorsports, like there's something about motorsports that it's why the car's sitting to the right of, like the 911's not just cool because it's 911. It's cool because what it did in racing, right? Like that's like what makes it cool. Even if you don't know that, it's why other people think it's cool, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's the classic of the trickle down. But anyway, JR, thank you. I knew this would be a quite enjoyable conversation. I just realized now that we were filming for a podcast as I was just listening to talk on all the things we need to fix. But you got any last remarks?
No, man, I'm good. I'm ready to start making moves. So
cool. Well, I'm excited to hear more on the Mark 1. I think that when do you think that would be something that actually comes together? Like
I'm sort of working on. I mean, it's a project that once I can hit the go button on it, which is a little bit of getting some initial funding lined up, which is like in conversation already. For sure, we haven't talked seriously about like the content side of this, but that's definitely a part of it. But once I can hit the go button on it, it's like inside of 12 months.
Cool.
So
keep me in the loop.
Will do.
Thanks, bud.
Cheers.
The mailbox is full. The mailbox is full. The mailbox is full. Full and cannot accept any messages at this time. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Vyper Industrial makes the best damn shop stools ever. Go buy them. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, I want to take a moment to really thank Vyper. They were the first to hop on and support Very Vehicular. When I hit them up, the immediate response was yes. We want the biggest package you've got. That's why they're the title sponsor. Look, they make a really great product, and I felt that way before this partnership, but they also do a really good job of supporting all of us in the car community. Think about it. They work with Adam LZ, Chris Forsberg, Grant Anderson, Travis Pastrana, Vermont Sports Car, and those are just the ones I can remember right now. So Vyper, thank you again for supporting Very Vehicular. And as I was saying before, go buy a damn stool at vyperindustrial.com. That's Vyper with a Y. Of all the sunglass companies out there, you might ask, why Heatwave? Aside from them being friends of mine, they just make great shades. Awesome styles, cool collabs, smart tech. They even have extra large sizes for big heads like me. And for those of you wearing this on the job, they make ANSI Z87 spec safety glasses too. But what really attracts me to Heatwave is that they are physically a part of our culture. You will find them everywhere, from King of the Hammers to Formula Drift. You'll see everyone wearing Heatwaves at your local track day event. Damn, you might even turn laps with the co-founder Justin, because they're one of us. So, one more reason to choose Heatwave Visual to fix your face. I'm a tool dork. My obsession might even dwarf my addiction to cars. I love collecting unique and specialty tools, which is how I initially fell in love with Wera. First off, they just make aesthetically pleasing tools. They feel good in your hand, they have a great finish, their sizes are universally color-coded, and they are super strong. In 2 decades, I've never broken a tool from Wera. I wish I could say the same about my other tools. But the thing I like the most about Wera is that they create clever solutions for your wrenching woes, because you need over-engineered tools to work on today's over-engineered cars. So if you're ready to step up your tool game, whether it's the Zyklop ratchet or the Joker wrenches, find them at weratools.com.